across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. It's not the Ian Collins Show, or rather it is, but with me covering for Ian Collins today and indeed tomorrow until 4 o'clock. Ian is away, I guess, at his Clacton caravan or wherever he is, so I'm here today and tomorrow. And we have a packed show, following in the footsteps of Julia and indeed Mike. That's a tough thing to do, by the way, but look, we will persevere. We will get there. And there will be things that we talk about, I hope, that will delight you, inform you, trigger you, maybe annoy you. And on that note, I would like your participation, please. So obviously you know the text number 87222 and the word talk, and of course you can call us, which is really the point of the show. Interaction. It's your show, your channel, so get involved, please. 0344 499 1000 with regard to any of the things that we're going to be talking about over the next 3 hours, or of course you can send a voice note via WhatsApp, same number, 0344 499 1000. So obviously some of the things that we're going to be talking about this afternoon are in the same vein as you would have heard on the station already today, because they're important stories. So things like the spring statement from Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves talking about growth. Well, I'm not sure that many of us are seeing it, unless you count growth in immigration. Maybe that's the growth that the government meant, and we'll be talking a bit about that later on. But certainly when it comes to the spring statement yesterday, obviously the big headline being her so-called assault on benefits and disability and sickness benefits. I certainly have a view on that subject that actually I don't think she's gone far enough. Lots and lots of people bleating about how outrageous it is that she is, having a pop at the poor, which is something that the Labour Party, a Labour government, should not be seen to be doing. But we'll talk later about the enormity, the extent of the cost of benefits, particularly sickness and disability benefits in this country, and why something had to be done. What Rachel Reeves effectively did yesterday was a tiny, tiny little slice of mitigation with regard to that bloated and increasing benefits bill. So we're going to be talking about that a lot. We'll also be talking about the really, really irritating subject, which I'm sure will get you going, which is the epitome, the demonstration, the proof of two-tier justice. We now have the Sentencing Council for England and Wales recommending to the government, to ministers, to Parliament, that when it comes to immigration offences, even though some of those offences carry terms in prison of up to 10 years, the Sentencing Council, by the way, they're the same people responsible for the fact that Hugh Edwards is not currently in prison. The Sentencing Council has said that some of these things should really not carry more than a 9-month sentence, despite the fact that Parliament thinks that certain people that transgress when it comes to immigration offences should go away for 10 years. I'd love to know what you think about that. Is two-tier justice okay? Is it okay that if you come here as a hard-pressed refugee, an immigrant, a so-called asylum seeker, bearing in mind most of them are really economic migrants, let's just tell it how it is, let's be honest, is it okay that they get treated with kid gloves, bearing in mind they're incentivised to come to this country in the first place with benefits and health and free this, free that, free accommodation, free driving lessons, and so on. Let me know what you think about that. Two-tier justice, personified, demonstrated, loud and clear. 0344 499 1000. Pupils with knives, seriously? I mean, look, anyone that brandishes a knife should go to prison. But of course, what do you do with a 7-year-old that has been brought up so badly by their parents and arguably society and schools, that I think it's okay to pop a bladed instrument in their kind of Bob the Builder lunchbox and take it into primary school just in case they should be annoyed by young Billy that they sat next to in, I don't know, clay modelling or face painting lessons or whatever they do in primary schools these days. So absolutely abhorrent that we should be in a situation where there are thousands now, thousands and thousands of offences in schools that relate to violence and weapons and bladed instruments and so on. We're also going to be talking later about Just Stop Oil. They've hung up their T-shirts, it seems, and are no longer going to protest and cause us aggravation. So what do we call that? We call that giving up, or do you think they've won because their ally, Mad Ed Miliband has decided that he is no longer going to allow us to use oil and gas in the future. So all of that coming up, lots and lots of guests. Theo Usherwood coming up. Mandira Kapoor-Smith, who's a serial entrepreneur, is going to be joining me at 2:30 to talk about the spring statement and this elusive growth that not only Rachel Reeves but lots and lots of her gaslighting Labour MP colleagues have been banging on about on Twitter this morning, saying how wonderful everything is. We will be dissecting that. And then we have an exclusive at 3 p.m. So this is us here at Talk, me and the team here, decided to put in a freedom of information request to Essex Police, and I will reveal the contents, the response from Essex Police, albeit very late. They actually broke the rules, Essex Police, believe it or not, in terms of not responding to the FOI in time. But park that to one side for a second. The contents of that will be revealed. And let me just give you a clue. It relates to DEI. We have found out how many people are employed full-time at Essex Police that are focused entirely on making sure that Essex Police Force is right on and DEI compliant, and you will be horrified at the amount of people that they employ to do that, and also the cost to you, the taxpayer. And if you live in Essex, listen up, because you are going to be horrified that there are lots and lots and lots of you paying your Essex Police precept on an annual basis simply for DEI roles at the behest there of the police, fire and crime commissioner Roger Hurst, and also the chief constable. So make sure you stay tuned for that at 3 o'clock. Join in 0344 499 1000. Someone that is joining in straight off the bat, Henry Hill, who's deputy editor at Conservative Home. He's going to be talking to me about some of these stories now. Henry, welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. Which one of those things you want to pick up on? Should we talk about two-tier justice first? Because we've talked a lot about this, haven't we? Not just here, but across the country in terms of the injustice of two-tier justice. The Labour Party have told us, Henry, for the last 6 or 7 months since the summer riots, that two-tier justice doesn't exist. Now we have evidence that seemingly it does, and it's going to be formalised.
Yeah, the sentencing council, frankly, should be abolished, and I think Labour are finally starting to learn why that's the case. Because, you know, it's easy enough to see how it started. Historically, there was a complaint that there was no standardization of sentencing. So if you or I did the same crime, but we ended up in front of different judges on different days, one of them had their Weetabix this morning and one of them hadn't, we could get very different sentences. So the sentencing council and its predecessors were supposed originally to just try and even that out. But what's happened, as always happens, is it gets captured by people with a particular ideological bent towards justice. And now we're seeing, as you say, them baking in double standards by, for example, the row a couple of weeks ago was that they were mandating that a laundry list of people with certain characteristics, ethnic minorities and women, should get pre-sentencing reports by default. Those almost always lead to much more lenient sentences. And now what we're seeing is immigration offences. The Sentencing Council is directly usurping the role of Parliament, because Parliament has passed primary legislation in which it sets out the range of sentences that judges can hand down for these immigration offences.
Well, let's talk, Henry, about some of these things. Right? So there are 4 key offences, apparently, that the Sentencing Council has decided that they want to dumb down. And that is the phrase I think we should be using. This is, they might say, you know, context, mitigation and so on. But these are the 4 offences. So effectively, if you enter the country without permission, the parliamentary statute effectively says that the maximum sentence is 4 years in prison. What the Sentencing Council are suggesting is that you should only receive 9 months if you enter the country illegally. If you use deception to enter the country, the standard sentence is 2 years. They're again recommending 9 months. But the horrifying one, Henry, is that if you possess false ID documents, so effectively you commit fraud in order to get into the country, so using false documents, which again could be borne by anybody, terrorists, people with malintent, criminals and so on, in order to hide their identity. Parliament has said that sentence should be a maximum of 10 years. So that's a proper disincentive, I would argue. What does the Sentencing Council suggest? 9 months.
Yeah, and you can see clearly the deliberate intent behind what they're doing, because short sentences like this mean that you can't deport people, right? Because there are rules in place. I think it's 12 months. It might be a bit longer. It's 12 months.
12 months.
Where if you're sentenced to more than, you can be sent back, right? And no matter what your position on legal immigration, even if you're somebody who thinks that our economy needs hundreds of thousands of workers a year, somebody who comes here on, as you say, false documentation, who enters the country illegally by deception, that ought to be something that everybody agrees that person does not deserve to be in this country. And yet the Sentencing Council is deliberately undermining the actual will of Parliament. This isn't a mild variation. They're not saying, oh, okay, well, Parliament said 6 years, but we think given the state of the prison system, maybe it should be 4 years and so on. They are deliberately offering sentences of less than 1/10 in one case.
Yes, it's a serious reduction. But Henry, answer me this. Do you think that there's no coincidence here that their recommendations are all below 12 months? In other words, the Sentencing Council, their whole MO, their whole intention here is that these people that enter the country illegally, whoever they are, use false documents, use fraud and deception, don't have a reasonable excuse for doing such. The whole MO here is for those individuals, specifically, even if they are caught and prosecuted, to not be deported. That's the whole ethos, the whole raison d'etre, if you like, of these guidelines, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely it is. And as you say, the one where they've knocked a 10-year maximum legal sentence to 9 months is the proof of that, because the gap is too big. It's not a justifiable potentially reduction because of the prison system or whatever. It is, they've knocked it down by a factor of 10.
Yeah.
That is clearly what they're doing. And these are the same people who a couple of weeks ago were trying to massively expand the use of pre-sentencing reports. And again, what do pre-sentencing reports do?
They're a mitigation.
They are overwhelming. Yeah, exactly. They're overwhelmingly likely to produce either a reduced jail sentence, a suspended sentence. They're almost a legal requirement for a suspended sentence, not quite, or a community sentence. Fundamentally, the composition of the Sentencing Council at the moment appears just not to believe in punishment.
And Henry,
the criminal justice system.
No, they're clearly not. And I'm quite sick of, and I know you're not suggesting it, but I'm quite sick of the excuse now, which is we need to mitigate, dumb down, let people off because there aren't enough places in prisons. We've been saying this for years and decades. Obviously, the easy answer is build some prisons. Bearing in mind, about 90% of Britain is not built on. So I think there's plenty of room. And you can imagine if we're throwing money around by way of foreign aid and asylum accommodation and goodness knows what else, net zero, pick your poison, that there would be enough to build, I don't know, what, 10, 20, 30,000 prison places. So I'm not buying this as an excuse. This is ideological, isn't it, on the part of the Sentencing Council? Bearing in mind, we should say, I guess we should, for balance, explain, this has not yet been adopted. So this is a Sentencing Council recommendation that goes to Parliament. The problem is, of course, we have a left-leaning, some would say Marxist-like government with a huge majority. There is every possibility that these sentencing guidelines will be adopted as process, as fact and law.
Well, certainly as guidance. It's called guidance, although judges are obliged to follow it. I think the one defence I think you can make of the Sentencing Council, I don't know about in this case with immigration offences, but on the earlier the row a couple of weeks ago, is that politicians settle that in train, right? It was two Conservative MPs, Cameron and May, who commissioned David Lammy to do a review into racial injustice. Exactly. But also, if you pick David Lammy, you are choosing the conclusions of that.
Well, of course you
know what he's going to say, right? And then the Sentencing Council did a consultation on changing the rules on sentencing under the last Conservative government, and it didn't object. And then it proposed these new guidelines under the new Labour government, and it didn't object. And then the press found out, and all of a sudden, the Justice Secretary is saying that she's going to legislate. So that is the only defence, is that politicians are useless, and that the Sentencing Council basically reflects that. But you're right, and building new prisons isn't even the easiest answer on prisons. You could take one of the, I think, 4 or 5 former prisons which have been closed under the last government, but can't get planning permission to be anything else, and are they therefore basically still prisons? I'm going to see Judge Jules in one in May, perfectly functional prison that's just been shut. So you could reopen 5 prisons, HMP Lancaster.
Well,
and a few
you
others,
could use some
overnight.
of the asylum immigration centres that are now having to be used, ex-RAF and military bases across the country. Instead of letting asylum seekers in as we do, we could maybe use those premises, those facilities for prisons, can we? Or, here's a shocking revelation and suggestion, maybe we could just deport the 10,400 foreign criminals that are in our prisons as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, don't let the Sentencing Council hear you say that, of course. But yes.
Well, we can't do it, because of the Sentencing Council. In the future, those individuals will be in and out of prison very, very quickly anyway. But of course, don't even get us started on the ECHR. And on that note, actually, Henry, at least Robert Jenrick has been a voice on this today, hasn't he? I haven't seen many other MPs, politicians on the right, apart from the usual commentariat like us, slating this. But Robert Jenrick has kind of stood up loud and proud, hasn't he?
Yeah, Robert Jenrick does have the advantage of being the Shadow Justice Secretary, so it's technically his job. He also has by far the best operation of any shadow minister in terms of just his media output, his research team.
Yeah.
He's more donor money than them, essentially. But this is a clear win for at least a future hypothetical Conservative government. Obviously, too close to the last one, you do have to answer the question, well, how did all of this happen under your watch?
Yeah.
Kemi Badenoch, right? That's a challenge for the Conservatives. But this should be a really, really easy win. If nothing else, if you paid other countries, to have people serve their sentences there are countries in Europe where it costs like a fifth on an annual basis to keep a prisoner than it does here. So if we simply paid that country to put one of our prisoners, our foreign prisoners, in their cell, like we could save tons of money. There are all kinds of things you can
like
do,
a kind of
including,
Rwanda scheme.
reform.
Yeah, Rwanda scheme that was, albeit for a slightly different purpose, scrapped at a cost of 700 million. We're going to go to a break now, but when we come back, let's talk about who the Sentencing Council is. I don't necessarily mean name them, but certainly we should discuss the fact that these are individuals, these are people, potentially with political agendas. We're going to take a break now, back after this.
£7 million that he's just spent on his house. And I just couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe you could spend £7 million on your house if you're not Vladimir, if you're not Putin, So that's incredible to me. But we've got to remember...
That's his parliamentary house, by the way. We should point out that's his official residence, which when he got this exalted position, as you say, he ordered £7 million worth of renovation.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to this, not the Ian Collins show. I'm sitting in, it's Russell Quirk, for Ian Collins today and indeed tomorrow. I'm still joined by Henry Hill. We've been talking about this two-tier justice thing. I'm going to be talking about that a lot more, actually, in about 10 minutes' time, Henry, with a former Border Force boss. So let's move on a bit, shall we, to the wonderful display that was yesterday's spring statement. Let me just read you a headline, see if you can guess where this is from. I'm sure you probably know, as a man of the moment and a man that keeps his finger on the pulse of the press. Balancing the books on the backs of the poor is this headline. Guess what newspaper that's from? You think it sounds like a Daily Mail headline or a Daily Express. That headline is from the Daily Mirror. Now, if the Labour government lose the backing of the Daily Mirror, is there any hope for them at all?
The government is doomed, but it's doomed really not entirely for reasons of its own making. Basically, the shadow of the 2017 election hangs over Labour especially, but all parties, and so they had this huge majority, this huge polling lead, and they should have done, right, we've got this huge polling lead, the public finances are in a really difficult spot, we're going to go and get an actual mandate for some painful changes. But what happened in 2017 when Theresa May tried that? She threw away a 25-point lead and almost lost the election. So they basically just lied. They either lied or, as seems to genuinely be increasingly the case, and it's hard to say as a Tory commentator because you sound like a partisan hack of the worst sort, they genuinely just thought that not being the Tories would be enough to deliver economic growth.
Yeah.
And that there were growth levers somewhere in Whitehall that the Tories weren't pulling because they were the Tories.
Yeah.
And that's proven not to be the case. And so where are we now? Stagnant tax base.
Yep.
Problems go back decades. Ramping up entitlement spending. Pensions, the NHS, social care are predicted on their own to take tax to 46% of GDP by the mid-2030s.
Yeah, highest tax burden ever.
Having to do?
Highest tax burden
exactly.
ever. Yeah. So we've had, over the last few hours, this morning particularly, the copy and paste posts from Labour MPs and Labour ministers saying how wonderful the spring statement was and that Labour are, repairing the broken back of the British economy and so on. And they've talked about the fact that there's growth and that wages are outpacing inflation and so on. So it's a very disingenuous bunch of statements designed to cover up the fact that the economy is failing. So let's just add some truth, Henry, shall we, to the reality of where the British economy is. So the OBR, who I don't have a lot of time for, to be honest, because most of the time when they forecast something and we then hang a budget on it, what tends to happen is the OBR forecast tends to turn out not to be accurate or true at all. But the OBR, though, have said, and if the government want to listen to them in terms of hanging a budget off this, then they also need to listen to the fact that the OBR have said that the UK growth forecast over the next few years has basically been halved, that the economy is hardly going to grow at all. Back in the day, a 3 to 4% GDP growth per annum would be seen as pretty good and pretty healthy. It's forecast as being barely 1%, but a few weeks ago, the OBR were forecasting 2%. So in other words, we're going to see half the growth than we thought we would. They've talked a lot about inflation coming down. Well, the new news is that I'm afraid inflation now is higher than it was in the last 3 or 4 months of the Conservative government. So inflation is still outside of the Bank of England target of 2%. We also have UK energy costs. Of course, the cost of energy in this country are the highest in the world. That, fun enough, wasn't mentioned in the spring statement yesterday. And council tax, of course, has just risen by 5.7%, aided by the Labour government, who had to give special dispensation and permission to certain councils to put council tax up by even more than that. There's one local authority, Labour I believe, that put council tax up by 15%. So I guess that little list there, Henry, would rather be the antithesis, the reality of where we are as an economy. And yet Rachel Reeves is trying to laud her efforts as somehow a magic bullet to growth in the future. I think she mentioned growth many, many times yesterday in the budget, but it's simply not true. It's not happening.
No. And again, as there are structural problems with this economy that go way back. Productivity flattened in about 2000, real wage and per capita GDP in the mid-noughties. I do think it's important to say, whenever we talk about GDP growth, the thing that matters in terms of making you, me, or any of the viewers actually better off is per capita GDP, which is dividing GDP by the number of people here. If you've got flat GDP at the same time as you have mass immigration, that's a really incredible achievement, because that means your country is actually getting poorer in per capita terms. So that's worth noting. But no, of course, Labour doesn't have a plan for growth, right? They have got some things which are nominally pro-growth, like some of their planning reforms, perhaps, but then they balance that with the employment rights bill that they're bringing through, which I think
hasn't even had an effect yet, because it hasn't even come in
right.
yet. There's a few other things I want to talk to you about before you go, Henry. So we've obviously spent, understandably, a bit of time on the Spring Statement and two-tier justice, probably two of the biggest stories. The other thing in the Spring Statement, of course, is the benefit cut, as I say, the Mirror attacking Rachel Reeves for balancing the books on the backs of the poor. But here's a reality check when it comes to how much money this country now spends on sickness and disability benefits. Before the pandemic, £65 billion a year. Post-pandemic, now £100 billion a year is what we spend as a taxpayer on disability and sickness benefits. So it's gone up by about 53%. So, you know, we can lament, or the left can lament all they like about the fact that this was a budget at the expense of the disabled and the poor. But is it beyond the realms of possibility that some people might pretend not to work and therefore get benefits as a consequence of that pretense?
They might pretend not to work. They might pretend that they can't work. They might, most tragically of all, be capable of working but genuinely believe that they're not capable of working because they've been out of work for so long and unemployment is hugely demoralizing. There are all kinds of reasons. The growth since COVID is absurd to pretend that all of that is absolutely real.
Well,
do you know one of the biggest
can't possibly
factors?
Be, can it? You can't possibly.
No, exactly.
Same population, roughly, barring net migration. It's impossible that those extra £35 billion worth of funds are legitimate. So, and let's talk quickly, again, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but 7-year-olds with knives in their school bags and ninja swords being banned. I mean, can you believe that ninja swords haven't previously been banned, Henry?
Yeah, we probably disagree on this. I think banning ninja swords is ridiculous.
What's the point?
Because basically, it's every time the knife crime line goes up, which it has done for year after year after year, the government tries to ban other slightly different types of knife, so it looks like it's doing something without tackling any of the issues that it doesn't really want to talk about, like, again, longer jail sentences, stop and search, and so on and so forth. Ninja swords are a collector's item. They're used in a vanishingly small share of crimes. Yeah, exactly. They're not going to make any. It's not going to make any difference because anyone who wants to hurt you with a ninja sword can go and get a kitchen knife and do the same thing.
But even when Yvette Cooper talked about banning zombie knives, you know, I looked and thought, if someone wants to do damage with a knife, yes, they'll go to the kitchen drawer. It's just knee-jerk reaction stuff. Actually, I would argue we don't need more legislation. Legislation already exists that says if you are caught with a knife, you know, regardless of whether you're using it for, you know, something untoward, if you're caught with a knife for the second time, it is a mandatory prison sentence. Yet the stats show that 80% of people caught with a knife for the second time don't go to prison. Surely the very, very easy, commonsensical solution there is if someone's caught for the second time, whoever they are, they go to prison.
Yeah, prison does work if you've got
law's already there.
Offenders.
The law's already there.
And let's face and the truth about crime always is that the overwhelming majority of most crimes are caused by a tiny proportion of the population.
Yeah.
And if you put that section of the population in prison, you'd have a vastly disproportionate impact on crime rates. But also, it's worth bearing in mind, when my dad was growing up, boys having pocket knives was common, and they carried it, and we didn't have a stabbing crisis.
Yeah, but they weren't slashing people and killing people, were they?
Well, but that means that there's things other than the availability of knives,
yes,
which are driving this,
causing the crime. Talking about crime, something to celebrate. I'm sure you've seen this. Just Stop Oil are hanging up their T-shirts at long last. They've decided that they're no longer going to inconvenience and antagonise us, members of the British public. Do we see this as them giving in, or do you think it is part of some kind of Love-In with Ed Miliband, where they're convinced that he is so off the charts bonkers on net zero that their work is done? Is it a victory, or are they giving up?
Well, I mean, they're claiming it as a victory, and you can sort of see why they would want to, given how Ed Miliband is a locus for unpopularity, maybe give him a break. But you know the crucial thing? They Just Stop Oil are not going to just stop fundraising. They're still drumming up more cash. So they're inevitably going to come back in 6 months and find something else that is going to justify making nuisances of themselves, because that's what they're for.
Well,
right?
Like vandalising Teslas. Vandalising Teslas, yeah.
Exactly. They're an exciting hobby for bored people.
Yeah.
Right, more than they are anything else.
Well, the epitome of that, of course, was Greta Thunberg went from being a kind of climate zealot to all of a sudden she was kind of pro-Palestinian. And I'm thinking, well, how do you join those dots? What's the link, therefore, between climate change and Palestinian support, as it is in some circles, of Hamas terrorism? These people are just agitators. They're just criminals.
Yeah, and in that case, it's because this is a problem the left has. It's called the omnipause, which is where if you buy into one of them, you're expected to buy into all of them at once. And it means that distinct, useful campaigns that might be able to be a broader support end up collapsing into part of this kind of really cohesive but much smaller left-wing agitator sphere. Yeah. It's a big tactical problem.
Well, Henry, it's what we used to call anarchy. And I was walking through the city on Tuesday, and there were two people in red boiler suits had shimmied up the front of the Royal Exchange building, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Very prestigious, very historic building. They were shimmying up it to protest against insurance companies that, in their view, were insuring unethical businesses, I guess like arms businesses and so on, right opposite the Bank of England in plain view. As I'm sure we will be talking about later on when it comes to our police exclusive story, there were not 1, not 5, not 10, not 20, but 23 City of London police officers standing around watching these two protesters shimmying up a pillar. And when I went up to one of them and said, look, are you here in anticipation of getting these people down? Albeit I would accept that there's an element of lawful protest and that's all fine. And they looked at me as if I was an alien and simply said, no, we won't be getting them down. I said, well, even if they damage the front of the Royal Exchange building, absolutely, we won't be getting them down. So 23 police officers to effectively police, big inverted commas, to oversee, to gawp at aimlessly two people protesting. So I guess we should thank our lucky stars that Just Stop Oil have now stopped their childish antics, and the police might even go back to actually solving proper crime.
I mean, yeah, the police's defence, I imagine, would be that there is a risk to the safety of the protester. It's the same as when people try to put themselves on motorway gantries. You can't get them down because what if they fall off? And you'd hope, at least, if they're going to justify having 23 officers, because you'd only need one to sit there being like, yep, they're still there.
Well, I think you need one and some makeshift mattresses, by the sounds of it.
Exactly. Maybe you could just stop. Maybe they're there to stop other people climbing up and making it a bigger protest. Well, but I don't know.
Massive,
and it is ridiculous.
Massive overkill. And as I say, we'll be talking about police priorities a bit later on when we talk about the FOI response that we have received from Essex Police. Henry, as ever, thank you very much indeed for, especially for the last 10 minutes there, rattling through the last few stories that we wanted to talk to you about. I'll be back after this. Going to take a break, and then we're going to be talking more about this two-tier justice. It's very, very real prospects that the bonkers Sentencing Council of England and Wales effectively want to let illegal immigration. So this is not immigrants causing problems when they're here. This is the very act of coming into Britain as an illegal act without permission, with false papers and so on. They want to dumb down the sentencing significantly. We're going to be talking to Tony Smith, who's the former head of UK Border Force. I'm sure he'll have an opinion on this. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Let's go straight to Tony Smith, who, of course, is a regular on this show and on this channel, former head of UK Border Force. Tony, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Russell.
Afternoon. Let's talk about this unbelievable revelation, this kind of two-tier justice personified thing, where, of course, as we talked about earlier on in the show, lots of people have talked about two-tier justice from the point of view of those that were criminalised for free speech and for having opinions, some of them a bit spicy, I'll grant you, back in the summer, were treated in a very, very different way to some other protesters in Britain over the last few years, whether it be Palestinian or whether it be Black Lives Matter and so on. And Keir Starmer actually in the past has stood up at the lectern and said two-tier justice does not exist. There is no such thing. And he's been actually quite passionate about that. I mean, almost as if he really believes it himself. Now we have evidence, don't we? Now we have the beginnings of fact and kind of formal policy and guidelines by the Sentencing Council for Britain, who of course are a quango, they're not elected, effectively now saying that if you come to Britain illegally, if you enter the country without permission, if you use fraudulent documents and so on, that instead of getting 10 years, as some of these offences command as a maximum sentence, the Sentencing Council is trying to persuade ministers and Parliament that the maximum these people should be given is 9 months. What on earth is going on here?
Yes, you're right. These guidelines from the Sentencing Council are concerning, I think, particularly for circumstances relating to foreign national offenders in this country and illegal migrants who come into this country, thereby committing crimes, because in the Borders Act of 2007, of course, you know, anybody who got imprisonment for more than 12 months would automatically be referred for deportation. And now what we're saying is, well, quite a lot of these cases, if these guidelines go through, will not get a sentence of 12 months or more. They will get less than that. So they won't automatically be referred for deportation. It does seem to me that this is sort of literally a get out of jail card for a very significant number of immigration offenders if these guidelines actually come into being.
Well, it's I guess we could call it a swerve, couldn't we? I mean, in the it looks as though the ethos here is specifically designed to ensure that those that are caught coming in illegally can never be deported, and that's without the obstacle of the ECHR, of course, which we know from recent weeks and months. You know, if you claim that you've got a mental illness, or you're a homosexual, or you're a Christian, or you are an alcoholic, I think is the latest ruse that we've heard over the last 24 hours, that your right to live here by way of the ECHR forbids you, therefore, for being deported. But this is just another layer of protection for people that come here illegally, stick two fingers up at our rules and our attempts, our flimsy and pathetic offence, frankly, to try and protect our borders. This is a concerted conspiracy, almost at the highest level, to try and not just dumb this down, but it's tantamount to absolutely encouraging more illegal immigration, because if we take away all of the disincentive, all of the penalty, all of the consequences of coming in illegally, and also layer in a few benefits, 46 quid a week, a house, an iPhone, driving lessons, and I'm not making this stuff up. This we all know are some of the things that are provided to so-called asylum seekers. I mean, this is almost the next layer, isn't it? Carry on with incentives, but make sure that those migrants that are coming here illegally, sometimes with ill intent, know that they're not going to be hauled over the coals and prosecuted properly.
Yeah, so I think there are two bits of judicial intervention. There's these sentencing guidelines that you referred to, which relate to the criminal justice system, where certain ethnic minority groups, including irregular migrants, might be favoured over those of us that already live here. And then, of course, there are a series of perverse decisions that we've seen from the First Tier Immigration Tribunal lately. Lots and lots of these are now being publicised, rightly in my view, but they've been going on for a very long time now, where human rights are being used by First Tier Tribunal judges as a reason why Home Office decisions to deport somebody have been overturned by the tribunal. So this is not the Home Office saying, we're going to let you stay here. The Home saying, no, not going to let you stay here. actually the border force, the immigration enforcement teams are saying we want to deport you. But of course, when they go to court, there are judges in the tribunals that are overturned for the most spurious reasons, which raises questions about the independence of the judiciary, really, and the interpretation that the judiciary are putting on some of these very old principles of human rights that I think do need addressing through statute. Because if we don't do that, we're just going to see more and more of this. And as you say, it completely undermines an effective border control in this country.
Well, Tony, let's see what everybody thinks of this. So look, the lines are open, 0344 499 1000. Do you think that we should be treating illegal migrants that break the law by the very nature of coming to this country with kid gloves? Do you think they should be given special dispensation, bearing in mind that we don't know who some of these people are? And you would imagine that if you jump in a boat having given £5,000 to a people smuggler, you know those gangs, by the way, that Keir Starmer is so intent on smashing. 9 months in, we haven't smashed any. But these people are doing that, but also ensuring that by throwing their passports over the side of that boat, or indeed having false documentations, which is, I think, the most serious offence, it would seem, in terms of the standard sentencing guidelines here, the fact that these individuals don't want us to know who they are, we should be treating in a very, very kind of sinister and pragmatic way. Yet the sentencing guidelines here, as they may well turn out to be once formalised, and to be clear, they haven't yet been formalised, they are just recommendations to government. But Tony, you'd agree with me, as I'm sure people listening to this would, that if it's a case of people coming here via cloak and dagger, they're coming here by way of hiding their identities, they are people that we should be treating very cautiously and seriously indeed, rather than reducing their potential sentence by 90%.
Well, yes, I mean, you're right in that the vast majority of people coming by small boat or by illegal means, in the backs of lorries, are instructed to throw their passports away, actually, by the human smugglers, because that makes it very, very hard for us to know who they are, where they're from, what their travel history is, and ultimately to send them back. So that's become an almost recognised practice. That is an offence. It's not usually prosecuted as such because, of course, as soon as they get here, they claim asylum. Yeah. And once they claim asylum, jurisdiction is taken away from the Border Force officer. The case goes into the Home Office for consideration. It could take a long time, lots of representations put in by lawyers, and then there's an appeal, and so on and so on. The longer people stay here, the more likely it's going to be that they can put forward a case to remain on the grounds of human rights, because they've established some kind of family here, or there's some good reason why they can't go back, because they'll face inhuman, degrading treatment. So we've really lost the plot on this. Well, when people come here illegally, they need to be sent straight back immediately whence they came, whether or not they've got a passport, which is what used to happen when I was an immigration officer back in the 70s and the 80s. But I'm afraid judicial intervention has completely reversed that process.
So is it true to say, Tony, so casting your mind back to when you were an immigration officer, and obviously you were running the head of UK Border Force, there were things that you were doing and could do in terms of turning people straight back that you now, or the force now, that organisation, that authority now cannot do, simply because of the intervention, and let's be fair, not just of liberal judges, but of course some very, very clever, manipulative immigration lawyers. So that's changed significantly now, has it, from the point of view of the Border Force Authority?
Absolutely. When I was an immigration officer, the power was vested in me by law to decide whether someone got into the country or not. If I felt not, they'd go straight back on the first available aircraft.
And sorry, you would literally do that? So you would march them to an airport,
yes,
stick them on a plane?
A passport.
Yeah.
We'd go straight back. We'd give a letter to the captain of the aircraft, and they would go straight back. And then when I moved into enforcement, same thing. If we found somebody illegally on the streets of London, then we would interview them, find out where they were from. I would write a letter, supported by my chief immigration officer, to the airport of the country where they're from, saying this person's been found illegally in our... Now, remember, this was in the 70s and the 80s, right? This is 20 years after the 51 conventions were signed.
OK, but what's changed since? Is it the Human Rights Act, which encompasses the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, which came into law in 1998? Was that the catalyst that changed it all?
Yes, although prior to that, it was the introduction of the asylum application process, which came earlier still. But in the 70s and the 80s, people didn't claim asylum. here. Whether they were illegal, whether they entered illegally, they were sent straight back by us. And I thought that was what people wanted.
Yeah.
But we haven't passed a law as such to change it. What's happened is these new legislations that come through over the years are reinterpretations of the 1951 conventions that are winning the day. And they've defeated border control, I'm afraid, in many respects.
Wow. So what we're saying is historically we did do and could do exactly what the majority of British voters have voted for, actually, in successive elections over the last decade or two, including the Brexit referendum. You were doing and could do exactly what most people would want you to do, but have been stifled effectively by not even a change of legislation, but a change of interpretation, and obviously because of the ECHR being incorporated into British law. I mean, and answer me this as well. I'm really concerned, not just about illegal immigration, the 35 to 40,000 people that come over in boats, plus those, of course, that come by lorry and other means. Whether they have ID or not, whether they claim asylum or not, do they get fingerprinted when they land on the shores of Britain?
Yes, they all get fingerprinted at Manston. They're taken ashore. They are all arrested, despite what some reporters say. Everybody gets arrested the moment they come off a boat. They're escorted through their holding centre to Manston, where they are screened, which includes fingerprints, photographs, and they're not moved on until such time as we've got the results of those checks. So we would know through fingerprint checks if they've been here before, if they've been deported before, if they've had a visa here. But what we wouldn't know, of course, is what they've been up to en route. And
but it doesn't sound, Tony, like it would make any difference, because you've got so many left-leaners, so many wokeists lining up to make sure that the nests of these illegal migrants are feathered to such an extent that, I mean, literally this government, the authorities, whether it's tribunals, whether it's judges, whether it's the government themselves, are literally bending over backwards to encourage people here illegally and to ensure they stay here. What do you, just quickly before we go, what do you think the motivation really is behind this? I know you're not a politician, you're not here to kind of, talk about what you think in that respect, but what do you think the motivation really is, Tony, for encouraging all of these illegal people to come here, whether we know who they are or not?
Well, so, I mean, the UK is a very attractive destination for irregular migrants, be they, for whatever reason. We do have a welfare state here. We do offer a very generous asylum reception system. We have a multi-community system where they would very likely find somebody here if they don't know anybody very quickly who will help them. And therefore, it's still a very, very attractive destination. But just let me leave you with a thought that I saw today that Poland are now refusing to accept asylum seekers on their eastern border with Belarus. We've seen President Trump refusing to accept asylum applications from people coming across from Mexico. Why is it then that we're still accepting asylum applications from people coming across our border with France? This is high politics. It's not about the law. It's about the interpretation of the law by politicians. Let's be honest.
Well, and I think it's purely political. I think those on the left actually want much more immigration. I'll cast your mind to what Philip Hammond, who is actually an ex-Conservative Chancellor. I can't quite believe that the word Chancellor and Philip Hammond and Conservative can all be put in the same sentence, given particularly what he said today, which is that he thinks that Labour should be encouraged to have more immigration to Britain, not less. That's a former Conservative Chancellor. No wonder the Conservative Party lost power. No wonder they may not ever regain power again when you've got a former senior Conservative minister, Chancellor, no doubt, one of the highest offices in the land, as a Conservative with a big C, effectively saying that we need loads more migration because I guess he thinks, falsely, wrongly, that immigration is good for the economy. Tony Smith, former head of UK Border Force, thank you very much indeed. Very enlightening, actually, in terms of the pragmatism there. And how frustrating must it be to be a member of Border Force, knowing that all of these people are coming in, some of them criminals, some of them potentially terrorists. They don't know who they are, and they effectively, as soon as they play the asylum card, they have to kind of really let them go. How frustrating. Let me know what you think about all this. 0344 499 1000. Given what you've just heard for the last 10 minutes with Tony Smith, do you sympathise with him and Border Force? I mean, it's not their fault, is it? We call them border fast, but I have a lot of sympathy for these guys, actually, because it is not a problem of their making. The responsibility has been taken away by a combination of government ineptitude, it seems, liberal judges, and the very, very sinister trade which is being an immigration lawyer. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Is it okay? Should we be more lenient towards immigrants? I would be surprised if anyone's going to ring in a minute and say, yeah, let's give them a little leg up. Let's give them more incentive and not be too hard on them. 0344 499 1000 or text me 87222 plus the word talk. This is Talk. I'm Russell Quirk. Back after this.
What does it say to you in hospitality?
Well, you know, you mentioned Sabrina Carpenter, and, you know, I had to look this up. And one of her hits is called Nonsense, and that's what basically, it's true, that's basically what her budget was. Yeah. Absolute nonsense. She said she's a party, of Labour is a party of work. Explain to me then how a 3.4 billion hit on this sector is going to create jobs and promote investment, and stop closures. It's going to do the exact opposite.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, in for Ian Collins until 4 o'clock, and tomorrow, actually. So he is elsewhere. I don't know what he's doing, actually, sunning himself. I have no idea. But anyway, you'll have to make do with me today until 4, and tomorrow till 4 as well. I'll be handing over to Harry Cole, by the way, at 4 o'clock today. So you'll have him for 3 hours up until Kevin O'Sullivan later on. But back to this show. Let's have some calls, shall we? Because there's been lots of them. Thank you very much indeed, as ever, for getting involved. We do want to hear from you. We want to know your opinion, whether you agree or disagree, regardless, comment, opinion, all good. So let's go to Matt, first of all, in Cheshire. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon, Russell.
Afternoon.
Firstly, Shabana Mahmood is a lunatic, and Labour are evidently sick in the head and a danger to British streets and citizens.
Tell us something we don't know, Matt.
Oh, well, you know, I'll just get that bit, the obvious bit out of the way first.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. We're still with you. Yeah. Got it.
These traitorous sentencing guidelines are proof that Labour are trying to change the demographics of Britain as much as possible in their single term, as well as letting illegal immigrants and minorities get away with committing crime to create fear and unrest. In my mind, it's probable that Labour want to purely put more white British people in prison to hide the reality that certain ethnicities commit more crime proportionately and to equalise statistics.
Yeah. So, and I think that there is definitely evidence, I would say, that suggests that when we go back to the summer in terms of how certain demographics were dealt with versus others. We should be very, very clear, though, Matt, that obviously this is not necessarily yet coming from the Labour government. Obviously, the Sentencing Guidance Council is a separate quango. I'd bet quite a lot of money that most of them are Labour supporters, I'd have to say, given what they have come out with in the news today with regard to how they think that we should be dumbing down and mitigating the crimes of illegal immigration into this country. But it's not yet actually Labour, a Labour-sanctioned thing. But I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes sanctioned by Labour, because quite honestly, their record in their first 9 months, contrary to what Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper were saying before they took office in terms of them smashing the gangs, they were going to reduce migration. I think they said they were going to halve it, didn't they? Halve illegal migration. Obviously, we're not seeing any sign of that. In fact, illegal migration, certainly in terms of boat entries to this country, started off this year much higher than the beginning of 2024 under the Conservatives. So there is no evidence that they're changing anything. So I suppose your contention, Matt, is that given the way that certain demographics, let's call it, white patriotic people, I guess is what you're saying by way of what happened in the summer, the way people are being treated differently, and compounded with this story today that those illegal immigrants coming over on boats particularly should be let off the hook. I guess you're joining the dots, and most people probably listening to this, Matt, wouldn't disagree with you.
Well, I mean, we've seen evidence. Well, one, it's not a coincidence that these guidelines are happening under a Labour government, so we can say obviously that they are for it completely.
Well, they haven't sanctioned it yet, but as I say, they may well do. But let's just be clear, this is not Keir Starmer, despite the fact he's a former lawyer, saying he wants to do this. But look, who knows what happens behind the scenes? I don't know if there's there's communication between government and the Sentencing Guidance Council where they say, look, actually, we'd like to let a few more immigration offenders off the hook. So if you can set us a set of guidelines, please, that we can then approve that are much more lenient. I mean, who knows? That might happen, but that's not the formal process, frankly. But I think, look, it stinks, doesn't it? It stinks, particularly in terms of everything that we've seen since the Labour government took office in July last year, where it would seem rather that, if you're a patriotic person on Facebook that makes some comments, albeit salty, albeit maybe unwise, you are treated very, very differently to someone that perhaps is here, in this case, illegally. And rather than getting 10 years for coming here with false documents, the Sentencing Guidance Council are saying that really you should only get 9 months. Matt, look, thank you very much indeed for your call. Lots of calls coming in on this. We will take some more later on. But tell me what you think. 0344 499 1000. Two-tier sentencing. It is definitely happening. And if the Sentencing Council of Britain have their way, it is going to get worse and worse and worse, particularly when it comes to illegal migrants that, of course, are incentivised to come here in the first place. It's pretty outrageous stuff. I'll be back after this. I'm Russell Quirk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Just gone 2 p.m. Russell Quirk in for Ian Collins. I'll be here till 4. And also tomorrow, if you can stand it, because Ian is still away. I'm joined now, though, by Theo Usherwood. Theo, welcome.
Great to be with you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me in.
No, my pleasure. Look, let's rattle through some of the poignant stories of the day. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, of course, is something that Rachel Rees kind of snuck in yesterday with regard to the civil service, the bloated civil service, I would argue. There's now, I think, 520,000 civil servants in Britain. Total wage bill of the civil service to you, the taxpayer, those watching and listening, this is £19 billion. I'll say that again, 19 billion with a B pounds. That's the wage bill for the civil service in Britain, and I think, look, there is no doubt that it is bloated, it is too big. Obviously it got a lot bigger during the pandemic, didn't shrink since. In fact, I think Labour have added to the tally, actually. But Rachel Rees yesterday said, look, I'm going to put in place a voluntary redundancy scheme. I think she's calling it an exit scheme. It's basically voluntary redundancy, to save £3.5 billion. Good idea?
Well, you have to beg the question, why can't they do a compulsory scheme?
Yep.
Well, a voluntary scheme, anybody can do it. If you own your listeners, many of them I'm sure own their own businesses, you can put in a voluntary scheme tomorrow, just say who would like to come forward. The other question is, and we haven't got this detail, they've announced the scheme. How generous is it? Well, I just wonder, I don't think it will be, I would be surprised, how does it compare to what a private business would offer?
I suspect it's very generous, but the very nature of it being voluntary would indicate to me that it is more generous, because there's a statutory amount of money that someone will receive if they're made redundant as a compulsory thing, which I think is something like, and I'm not an expert, but a week's money for every year worked, something like that. The only way you make a compulsory scheme work versus a voluntary scheme is to make the voluntary scheme much more attractive.
Yes.
So I suspect, and again, we're talking about taxpayers' money here. Yes, the big headline from Rachel Rees is, I'm going to save £3.5 billion. But yes, what's it going to cost? Because, of course, that cost has to come out all in one go. So Rachel Rees, I mean, dare I venture, might be massaging the numbers here a bit.
Yeah, and you don't want a scheme, Russell, where we decide to save the money now, £3.5 billion now, but in 6 months' time, suddenly something happens. I don't know, it's a Brexit. We saw civil servants numbers go up with Brexit. Pandemic. Suddenly we need more civil servants, especially working around public health, and suddenly we bring all those people back. Or worse still, we let them go and then we hire them as consultants, which is even more expensive.
That is a fabulous point, because that, I think, is exactly what does happen. In fact, my experience when I was a counsellor was that people would leave by way of a deal, whether it be voluntary redundancy or signing a non-disclosure agreement because something had happened, and they'd walk away with tens of thousands of pounds, and then 4 or 5 weeks later you'd see them in the corridor. You say, hey, X, what are you doing here? I thought you'd left. Oh no, I'm now a consultant, and they've asked me to come back at more money on a day rate to do the job basically that I was doing before. So there's a big danger, I think, that this is manipulated, that it is just a headline, that it is sleight of hand. So I don't want to be too down on the fact that at first blush it looks like Rachel Rees is trying to cut the size and the cost of the civil service to save that money. I want to see the detail of the numbers, though. Where is that saving of £3.5 billion? Over what period of time? Is that 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
So I think it's over the course of the forecast, which is till 29-30. So that was how
the end of the Parliament.
The end of the Parliament. The other thing to remember, and I read the detail in the story actually, and it was that each application for voluntary redundancy is going to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And the danger you have here, actually, Russell, is you end up with a perverse system where actually the best people can actually be hired by the private sector. So the people who really know what they're doing in a particular department, who have the best contacts, who actually know their way around how government works. What happens is they suddenly go off to the private sector and they secure themselves another job. Then they do the voluntary redundancy, and they say, okay, I'll take the voluntary redundancy. They get double bubble effectively. They leave the civil service. They go into the private sector. And now the government's saying, well, actually, we want to have the right to block any individual leaving. But actually, what you don't do is what needs to happen is we need to get rid of the dead wood.
Well,
we need to get rid of we need to get rid of the individuals who aren't contributing to the civil service, who aren't making it better, but are actually taking.
And is it fair to say? And I think I speak on behalf of anybody watching this or listening to this that has ever had any interaction with a local council about their council tax or their bins being collected, or anyone that's tried to speak to the passport office or DVLA about a missing driving licence or whatever, generally, and of course this won't apply to every single public sector employee, but generally the response is pretty apathetic, pretty inefficient, and not very good. So is it too much of a stretch to imagine that those 520,000 civil servants, the same job, if they all worked a bit harder, could be done by 400,000 civil servants? I think that's not an outrageous kind of summary of where we could get to, and saving the salaries of 120,000 civil servants would be, by way of a compulsory redundancy, significant and permanent.
Yes, and I think it was Margaret Thatcher who made that, Baroness Thatcher, the former Prime Minister, who
God rest her soul.
Who made the comment. What could we do? Could we do exactly the same with? If my memory serves, thousands of civil servants.
Theo, it would happen in the private sector. So we, the world, the economy, Britain, we all go through, economic cycles. Sometimes those cycles, in terms of downturns, are enforced by our hapless politicians, like it's happening now. But in a private sector environment, of which I've been involved, I'm afraid sometimes people have to be laid off. It just happens. It seems though that in this instance, Rachel Reeves probably knows that the civil service is bloated, but of course because there's a union element, and because of course she's just been seen. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the front page. You've got the front page of the Sun there, but the front page of the Mirror has gone to war with Rachel Reeves today, a left-leaning tabloid having a pop at a Labour Chancellor because of what she's done on benefits. So maybe Rachel Reeves just doesn't have the courage to say, and do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut the civil service by 25%. No,
and I think the figure that she's talked about is 15%, but certainly within that, and Pat McFadden said it a couple of weeks ago, who's in effect the Deputy Prime Minister, that's in all but name, he turned around and said there aren't going to be any compulsory redundancies. They're very wary of people like Dave Penman, who runs the Civil Service Union. They can't afford to annoy him, and of course what they don't want to happen is they don't want the civil service to go on go slow mode. And that was something the Tories, for what they tried to do in terms of civil service reform. You think back to Jacob Rees-Mogg putting those notes on civil servants' desks saying, why aren't you at work today? The net result of that was that actually you ended up with a civil service that just didn't want to do business with ministers, and that actually ended up being counterproductive.
Well, they didn't want to do as they were told.
No.
Which is, and the clue is the clue is in the second word of their title, civil servants.
Yeah, they're there to serve the people, but they're not going to. They don't. Civil servants, and I think the best. Do you ever watch Yes Prime Minister?
What,
yes, Minister. Yes, Minister. Yes, Minister. But that's how they operate.
A parody that's now being played out for real.
But it's been played out for real for generations. Yeah. They're a law unto themselves. Many of these individuals, right? Yeah. They will do what they want to do.
And when do we ever hear about a civil servant being sacked for lack of performance or gross misconduct? Apart from Sue Gray, who's speaking in the House of Lords today, by the way. Guess what she's speaking about, Theo? Unfair dismissal. The irony. The irony of that. How funny is that? So look, we've got to stop treating the civil service as almost putting it on a pedestal, treating it with kid gloves. But also, civil servants don't have that right to that job. If there's any civil servants watching this, listening, if I'm being really unfair here, being down on civil servants based on my fairly considerable experience both in the public sector and as a consumer, please, look, defend your position, sing for your supper. Tell me why civil servants are the hardest working people in Britain, and we need more and more and more of them. 0344 499 1000, because frankly, I don't think I'll ever be convinced that that's true.
But I remember the late Jeremy Hayward, who was, of course, the Cabinet Secretary for multiple Prime Ministers, made the point that he was in front of a select committee, and he made the point that, we provide a service to ministers, and that it's not the same. They don't view, which was quite telling in his remarks, he never viewed, and he was the ultimate civil service. He knew his way, he knew how to handle the most capricious ministers in their view, the civil service's view. But they don't see themselves as employees of ministers. They see themselves as slightly detached, and that creates a problem. Now, when you make a decision, you say you run a business, when you make a decision, in the back of your mind, you're thinking about pounds and pennies, because that's your money. When they make a decision,
there's accountability.
They don't need to think about the pounds and the pennies because it's not their money. And that's where we end up with this problem, where you end up with, okay, we've got the pandemic, let's just hire more people. Okay, we've got Brexit, let's just create a whole new department. Because actually they don't need to worry about the bottom line. They don't need to worry about the profits.
Well, my experience is even more sinister than that, which is that civil servants think they run the country, and sometimes weak politicians allow them to do so. I remember a chief executive of a certain council saying to me many years ago, if politicians leave a void, civil servants will fill it. And that's really scary, because civil servants are not elected, they're not accountable, they should be, they're not, but they also have, shock horror, their own agendas. A bit like we were talking about the Sentencing Council just now. That Sentencing Council decision to recommend to government that we dumb down immigration offences, that is born of an agenda. I mean, tell me what you think about the sentencing guidelines that we were talking about today.
I mean, look, we've got to end up in a situation, and you can't turn around and say, or the ministers or prime minister or whoever cannot turn around and say you don't have a two-tier justice system when the sentencing guidelines are proving that there is a two-tier justice system. Now
shout very loudly that that's the case. I've just got to bring some breaking news, Theo. Just bear with me a second. So Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron have agreed today to send officials to Ukraine to help put in place plans for after a peace deal is agreed. It comes after Moscow warned the UK and France that they are risking a direct clash between Russia and NATO. Serious stuff. Speaking in Paris after another meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, Starmer today accused Vladimir Putin of playing games over the peace process, saying there had been absolute clarity that Russia is trying to delay among those present. So to be very, very clear, Keir Starmer, in his quest to be seen as a world statesman and to end up with some kind of Blair-like legacy, not that I think you'd want a Blair-like legacy, Theo, is shouting the odds with his miniature friend, President Emmanuel Macron of France, whereby they are effectively forging a plan, the precursor being sending officials to the Ukraine, but shortly thereafter, one would imagine, boots on the ground as a peacekeeping force in direct defiance of warnings from Russia. You got any comment on that?
There's another line as well to come out of that short press conference, and I saw it. He faced the cameras. Keir Starmer just now with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Keir Starmer also made the comment, Russell, that he thought, in his view, sanctions should not be removed, and that is a key demand from Moscow in its negotiations with Washington, that sanctions are removed in order to get that ceasefire.
So under what circumstances does Starmer think that the sanctions should be removed? Because otherwise, what's the incentive? I mean, what's the added incentive for Russia to agree to a ceasefire?
You can only go back to the previous argument that Keir Starmer has made, which is the wholesale withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine before sanctions are removed.
He's obviously not researched Vladimir Putin very well, has he?
No, I mean,
he's not a man that's going to be pushed around and being told what to do, is he?
Look, ultimately, this is a negotiation. It doesn't matter, and it's not something I say with any pleasure or any, pleasure. It's a regrettable situation, but this is a negotiation that is being conducted between Washington and Moscow, between Trump and Putin.
Well, let me give you my take.
Anything that happens anywhere
Let me give you my
else.
take. This, unfortunately, is a negotiation between egos. It is the egos of Donald Trump, Keir Starmer, Vladimir Putin, and Zelensky. That is a very, very unfortunate and rather dangerous combination because no one wants to back down, particularly as they are on the world stage. So that makes this very volatile indeed. My personal view is that if we continue as we are, no one is going to give way, because no one has a face-saving mechanism by which to back out of the door. So will some of the Ukraine have to be annexed? Yes. Should we stop giving all this money to Zelensky? In my humble opinion, yes. Otherwise, nothing changes. And this war goes on for years and years and years.
But I think ultimately what's going to happen is Trump, if he can get Putin to the negotiating table, Trump has all the cards, and he's just going to exert incredible pressure.
Off tangent here, but Trump, for all of his faults, he is the new kid on the block in terms of him being the catalyst that allows the likes of Zelensky and Putin to back out through that door with some grace. That is what needs to happen here. If we keep doing the same thing, expecting different outcomes, guess what? There ain't going to be a different outcome.
I think that's the definition of insanity, isn't it?
Let's go back to the migrant question as well, because there's a report here in the Telegraph about how the OBR, so Rachel Reeves' favourite organisation, is actually saying that Labour, in effect, in the long term, it's official, overseeing a long-term surge in migrants to Britain. So even though they are trying to say they think net migration will drop, I think it was about 900,000 people last year. They think that will drop to about 340,000 a year by the end of the decade. It is still far, far higher than it previously has been. So basically, Labour are not solving the migration problem either illegally or legally at all, and that's official. That's from the government's own body, the OBR.
And you had Philip Hammond, the former Chancellor, Conservative Chancellor.
We just talked about that, yeah.
on the radio this morning, saying that if you want to build the homes that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer want to build, the only way you can do that is to import migration from abroad. Now, the argument might be that you get an increase in GDP, but you don't get an increase, and this is what previous figures show, an increase in GDP per capita.
Yeah, we're getting poorer per person. And so the birth death rate in the UK is about at parity now. So as many people die as are born. So we're not a growing population. The problem with that is that some on the left believe that migration, almost as an open door policy, that we should just let all and sundry in, solves that. But of course, if a lot of the migration coming to the UK doesn't contribute to the economy because people are on benefits,
or not net contribution to the economy.
Then of course the economy doesn't grow, or if it does overall, per person we're getting poorer and poorer. I was absolutely astonished this morning to hear Philip Hammond saying that as a former Conservative Chancellor. I would suggest that whoever it was within the selection committee of his constituency when he was selected as a Conservative MP didn't do a very good job, because if you genuinely believe what Philip Hammond believes, you have no place in the Conservative Party whatsoever.
It's why Reform's doing so well. It's why he cannibalised the Conservative Party at the last election.
How on earth is the Conservative Party? I've got no idea if you're a Conservative-minded voter or not.
I remain impartial.
Great, good.
I just say
so how does the Conservative Party go from Thatcher to Philip Hammond? And how on earth has that happened over the last few years? We go from protecting our borders, but wanting to see low tax, pro-business, being very, very pragmatic about immigration, being tough on crime. We, under the last 14 years of a Conservative government, and whether that's Cameron, May, Boris or Sunak, we've ended up running the country like Liberal Democrats.
So, or you ended up certainly with Cameron. I think what happened is you had... we live in a much more connected world than we lived with Margaret Thatcher, which means that people can travel much more easily, and they can. And we end up in a situation where, and this is after where we haven't invested in training up and educating and providing the right vocational training to the young people in our schools and education in this country. And so in order to fill those skills gaps, rather than actually going in and saying we want to get kids out of our schools into the workforce with the right attitude, with the right skill set that employers want, we can't do that anymore. And so what do we have to do? We have to go abroad in order to get those skills. I did an interview with Janine Chamberlain, who runs LinkedIn, back at the end of October, and she made the point to me, for all of the government's talk about net zero, we just don't have, let's just say, for one moment, and I know how you feel about net zero, and I've got a similar skepticism about it, but we don't have in this country, the point she's making at the moment, and they know this from their algorithms on the LinkedIn app, right? This is not a political point. We don't have the people, the men and women who can insulate the homes.
Just carrying this conversation a bit. We must go to a break. We've got to pay for this stuff somehow. Back after this.
one of the things that hasn't been factored into the OBR's numbers and forecast is the employment legislation and the effects of that. And we know that that's going to be a multi-billion-pound burden to businesses. So we're in a very bleak place. Look, she trashed and burnt all of her headroom against the fiscal numbers. She blew the whole lot and more. And she's now rebuilt this through various decisions that she's taken. We might not in the autumn, I'm afraid, at the next budget, be looking at some more hard choices, maybe around tax increases.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, in for Ian Collins. I'm here till 4 o'clock. It's 23 minutes past 2. I've still got Theo here, who I've asked to stay as a special favour because there's more stuff to talk about. By the way, at 3 o'clock, we are going to be talking about this exclusive to Talk, something that myself and the team have engineered here over the last few weeks, which is the consequence of a freedom of information request that we put into Essex Police. We now have the result of that, albeit late. Yes, they broke the rules, Essex Police. Surprise, surprise. And let me just tell you, before I come to it at 3 o'clock and reveal the contents of that FOI response, it is about how much Essex Police spend on DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. So ready to grit your teeth, particularly in the light of Essex Police door-stopping Alison Pearson and no doubt others, and trying to curtail free speech from a journalist, no less, in terms of her view on social media. Let's just say, I don't want to jump forward too much, that there might be a question mark over their priorities, particularly financially when it comes to your money. Theo, hopefully you'll be listening into that. But I want to talk to you about the police in a different vein. There's a story today in The Sun, which I know you've got in front of you there, which is police officers will be given more powers to stop protests near synagogues, mosques and churches. Now, we talk about a slippery slope when it comes to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of congregation. The reasoning apparently by way of this is that the police want more powers so that if there's a protest, let's say outside a religious institution that they think might get a bit spicy, they can cancel it. But it is a slippery slope, isn't it? The fact that we then can pick and choose based on presumably one police officer's say that actually let's not have protests outside certain places like mosques, because we can then try and suggest that there might be some incident as a consequence of it. I guess what I'm getting at, this new power could be abused.
Yes, it could be abused, but there may, it depends how it's used. So the real concern, particularly from the Jewish community in this country, Russell, is that every Saturday we've seen these demonstrations up and down in the streets of London, Manchester, Birmingham, pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And the Jewish community, many of them have been unable to get to their synagogues, and they've been blocked from doing so. As a result, they've been unable to have, the freedom to worship.
But surely this should be a question of, I mean, I'm a huge and firm advocate of the right to protest.
Yes.
As I said earlier on, I walked past a protest outside Royal Exchange this week, and although I kind of tried to pick at what was happening by way of the police being there in such great numbers, 23 of them, as to presumably they were there to get that person down, I didn't necessarily agree that they should, because it was a peaceful, lawful protest. The solution here, though, surely is to allow the protest to go on, but for the police to police the protest so that it actually isn't preventing, for instance, the Jewish community getting to their synagogue on a Saturday. Surely it's overreach, isn't it? Just to say, well, OK, on the basis that there might be some inconvenience here, or we can make up the prospect that somehow there's going to be some kind of intimidation or crime committed. Therefore, we stop all protest.
I completely agree with you on that. We've got to allow freedom of expression in this country. We can't start saying you can't have any more protests. But where I have real concerns, and I was out on Saturday, I went to a press conference the Prime Minister had in Downing Street, and I came outside to a pro-Palestinian demonstration
at the end of Downing Street,
going down Whitehall.
Yeah.
And it started further up, going up past Trafalgar Square, and it was a horrendous spectacle. Intimidating, blasting music. If you were...
But no violence, though?
No violence. But if you were a Jewish person who was trying to be in central London, you would find that a threatening atmosphere. And what we have seen at those protests, and we've seen the placards, we've seen the chant, we've heard the chants from those protesters. You know, that is...
Yeah, but that's where it crosses the line. So a protest being intimidating is undesirable, but not in itself illegal. I think the alternative, and I know you're not suggesting this necessarily, but the alternative to then ban it because it is intimidating, I think is a slippery slope. But of course, there are laws in place that...
But they're not being used, those laws.
Well, that's a whole different subject, right? So if Mark Rowley, who is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, decides through his subordinates not to enforce the law when it comes to, let's say, pro-Hamas terrorist supporting protesters,
displaying red triangles and stuff,
showing Nazi swastikas on on flags and suggesting such things as and chanting, from the river to the sea and so on. Laws already exist. So the problem here, therefore, it seems, is not a problem of the law. It is a problem as to the way that the law is enforced.
Or enforced against one community and not enforced against another community.
That's what we've been talking about all day. So two-tier policing, and also a matter of priorities. When I see 23 police officers standing there watching someone shimmying up the Royal Exchange, I think that's a waste of resources. When you've got Essex Police spending, and I won't reveal how much yet until 3 o'clock, but I mean hundreds of thousands of pounds on DEI, fluffy stuff to tick a load of boxes to make a minority feel, and I mean a minority in the police feel, comfortable and that they have been appeased. We need to get back to, and we'll be talking to Peter Blexley about this after 3, just old-fashioned, common sense, firm and fair policing without trying to be a political organisation, which clearly the police are trying to be. They're trying to tiptoe between the rights and wrongs of different cultures, different races, different religions. They've got to be firm and even-handed. Look, 0344 499 1000. Please let me know what you think about this, because is it too much just to expect the police to do their job and to police properly, and also to do it in a balanced and even-handed way? I don't care if you're black, white or blue or red, male, female, I don't care what your gender is, what your sexual orientation is, everyone must be treated the same.
I think part of the problem, though, and this is a piece of commentary, and this isn't something that I would adhere to at all, is that we live in an increasingly polarised world, and the police seem to have lost their compass as to, you talk about what is fair, what is the common sense policing, and within this polarised world, where does the police sit? Now, I'm of the view, which I imagine is fairly similar to yours, that the police need to be able to sit above everything. They don't need to take the knee. They don't need to have. They don't need to have a particular badge.
But Theo,
they don't need to keep a certain group on side.
There are two important aspects of policing. Not that I'm an expert on policing. As I say, coming up at 3 o'clock, we'll have one on. But no fear, policing through no fear or favour, and also policing by consent. I think the police, and I don't mean the rank and file. I don't mean police officers. I mean the hierarchy of the police have completely lost their way because they're trying to tick too many political boxes. They've got to step back from that. And actually, I would argue, as I would say to Peter Blexley or anybody else that we have on this channel talking about policing, that you've got to have some old school, old-fashioned traditional coppers at the top of our policing service, rather than people that have been through academia until they were 30.
They don't do that anymore.
I know, and that's the problem.
You have the grad schemes, don't you?
That's where it all went wrong. So anyway, look, back to the point here. We've got to go to a break and say goodbye to you, but back to the point here. We've now got effectively a knee-jerk reaction, which is that the police might be given more powers, which is intimidating and sinister in itself, that when they say the police would be given more powers to stop protests near synagogues, mosques and churches, it ends up being one person that might have a political affiliation. I don't think that's right. No. Theo, this has been wonderful.
Great.
We've covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be back after this. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm in for Ian Collins. Coming up at 4 o'clock will be Harry Cole, so I'll be handing over to him. I'm sure he'll have lots to say. But meantime, let's speak to somebody else about the spring statement. Let's talk to Mandira Kapoor-Smith, and in particular, let's talk about Mandira. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk about not the politics of it. Let's talk about this from a business point of view, because you're a bit of a serial entrepreneur by the looks of it. I've just looked at your LinkedIn profile. It's very, very impressive, I have to say. So I would imagine that you're not a big fan of Rachel Reeves, Mandira.
Not at all, actually. I don't know how she gets to do any policy, considering she's never run a business, she's never created wealth. So I don't know where she gets to put anything down on paper and you know, tell us what to do.
So do you think that should be a prerequisite for a chancellor or a business secretary? So Jonathan Edwards, of course, who's the business secretary, has never really had a proper job by the looks of it, let alone run a business. Do you think we should be calling on entrepreneurs and people that run businesses successfully?
I think anyone talking about creating growth should have done it themselves first. And I think the fact that there's no one in this government who has actually done it, to be setting policies which they don't understand. They're not listening to the people. They're not looking at what they...
Well, Mandira, your line is breaking up a little bit, so look, we're going to try and fix that. So let me just have a little rant while we're waiting to do that before Mandira comes back. Let's look at some truths, shall we, in terms of the reality of the British economy right now. So Rachel Reeves, of course, and Keir Starmer have spent a long, long time talking about growth, GDP growth, so gross domestic product. That's basically the measure of how big the economy is. And I can tell you, it's hardly growing. And even the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, are suggesting that it will actually grow half as quickly, half as much over the next few years than they actually thought previously it would. Unemployment under threat. We haven't yet seen, of course, the introduction of things like the Workers' Rights Act and indeed the huge assault on businesses, which is £20 billion being added to the employer national insurance bill. So we've got all that to come. And of course, the national minimum and living wage being increased, which is great for low earners, but not so brilliant actually if you're in the hospitality industry and most of your costs are by way of staff, and you've now got to pay another 15% or so onto your staff bill when you're running a cafe, restaurant or pub. Many have already closed actually in anticipation. So that's the reality of where the economy is. Rachel Reeves and others are talking a lot about how they have got this. The economy is in safe hands. Wage growth is more than inflation. Inflation, by the way, is still outside of the Bank of England's guidance. So look, things are not in a great place, despite the fact that we're being gaslit to within an inch of our lives by Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, and of course just about every other Labour MP that has a Twitter account today. Anyway, so that's the reality. Look, we're going to try and get Mandira back, because I really want to hear about this from the point of view of a proper business person, on the basis, and look, I might be a bit biased, I run a business, I'm a private sector advocate. I see the need absolutely for a public sector, but not a bloated one, not one that is the tail wagging the dog. There are about 16 million people employed by SMEs in Britain. The tax that those individuals and those businesses pay, and the VAT on the things that their wages then pay for thereafter. Basically, it's the spine, the backbone, the core of how Britain's economy functions. And I think what Mandira was just about to say there is absolutely right, that I'm afraid politicians, particularly of a left-leaning nature, particularly Labour politicians, have absolutely no idea how the private sector works and how important it is. And the fact that we've just given huge inflation-busting pay rises to the public sector, the fact that we pander to the public sector and we're hiring more and more people, despite what Rachel Reeves says she's going to do in terms of this voluntary redundancy scheme, would rather indicate that whilst we're adding £20 billion worth of national insurance cost to the private sector and bloating the public sector, she's got it all round the wrong way, isn't she? 0344 499 1000. Let me know what you think. We're going to try and get Mandira back. I think Mandira's actually in India at the moment, so yes, hence some slight technical issues in terms of the lines. But let's go to a caller actually in the meantime, because there's lots of you, and thank you by the way for getting involved. Philippa from Paul in Dorset. Philippa, you'd like to get involved on the basis of what? Two-tier borders?
Well, Russell, I just think the whole system is an absolute mess. Rachel Reeves doesn't know how to spend the money properly, and basically illegal should tell you all you need to know. Illegal means against the law, so illegal migrants should not be coming here. They're breaking the law in that instance, first of all. And then if they come over here and they commit a crime, again, they're creating illegal acts, they're doing illegal acts. They should be detained and deported straight away. They shouldn't be put in prison. They shouldn't be processed in any way in this country, because it's costing the taxpayer an absolute fortune.
Yeah, well, look, Philippa, I don't disagree with you. I don't think many people listening to this disagree with you. Tony Smith, of course, who is ex-head of Border Force, was explaining kind of how that used to happen but doesn't anymore. Philippa, I've got to cut it short because we're back to India now, and hopefully we've got Mandira back, I think. Mandira, are you there?
Sorry about that.
No, not at all, not at all. It's, yes, some kind of cyberspace issue, no doubt. Yeah, so I was just kind of ranting, really, about the reality of where the British economy is. But tell me exactly what your view is of, and maybe not just Rachel Reeves in terms of her tenure, but where do you think, you as an entrepreneur and a taxpayer and an employer, how do you feel about the current state of the British economy, Mandira?
I think I've been stripped. I think we looked at Labour coming in to change stuff, and they've fought for the black hole, and all they've done is accuse the black hole. So, I mean, you know what? Put your hands up, say you can't do the job, and move on. Because what you're doing is you've got a bunch of people who have never created wealth, trying to create wealth. Guess what? Don't try now. Go try on your own time. You're wasting our money. You're telling us you're getting people off welfare, but people are not going to get employed because of what you've done now. If you're going to charge extra taxes for us to employ people, where are we supposed to make our money?
Yeah.
Where is this country? This country is going backwards, not forward.
Yeah, no, and the data shows us that. No matter what Rachel Reeves tries to tell us via her Twitter account, that everything's rosy in the garden of 11 Downing Street. We're seeing growth and wages are outstripping inflation. The reality is growth is absolutely minimal. Inflation is higher now than it was when the Conservatives left government. We've got a huge £20 billion national insurance bill that kicks in a couple of days' time. Tell me how that affects you, by the way, Mandy. I don't know how many people you employ. I don't know if you can tell us that.
I'll tell you something. Being a non-dom, I have a lot of friends who are non-dom who have created a lot of jobs and a lot of wealth who have left the country.
So you employ people here. So you're a non-dom, but you still employ people in Britain.
I brought a lot of money into this country. I've employed a lot of people. I've been forced now to have to close because I can't afford. I am technically a startup moving my company here.
Hang on, Mandira, sorry. So you've closed your business, what, as a consequence of...
I've had to close my business because what the government has done is not... I can't keep up with it. I can't keep up paying HMRC, paying extra VAT, paying extra taxes. Everywhere you move, you're paying people off and no one's making money.
So you've had
making money.
Mandira, you've had a very, very successful business, more than one, but you've had to throw your hands up and give up because of the tenure of the Labour government since they came into office in July. So you are one of the 200,000 businesses, by the way. I'm not making this up. This is the stat. 200,000 businesses have closed since Labour took office on July the 5th, 2024.
Yes, and I've had a lot of friends who have left the country because they can't sustain businesses here. They're going to go set up somewhere else. And guess what? You're driving the wealth out. They go on about the wealthy, but guess what? The wealthy work to get where they are. They're not going to give it up because you've decided you want to tax us more. Yeah. No one's going to do that. We work, and the reason you're not going to grow wealth is because of what you're doing. You're driving out people who can grow the wealth in the country. So I think it's a joke. I don't know who they think they're fooling.
Well, I think they're fooling themselves. I think the jury's out.
But the fear is this country is going backwards. It's going to become a third world in 5 years if this government carries on.
Yes.
And that's the reality.
Yeah.
And it's not a joke.
And so what you're saying, you're a very real example then of businesses that have had enough of the UK because of the tax regime, regulation, red tape, national insurance increases and so on. literally lifting their business, their assets and their families and going and living elsewhere. I mean, we hear a lot about people going to Dubai,
Well, I'm not
to
doing
Monaco.
that. I'm not doing that because I want to get more involved and get the economy going and get growth going, because I believe I moved here for a reason. I believed in this country, and my husband's British, my kids are in boarding school here. You know, it's very difficult to keep getting up and setting up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to fight this through, and I'm going to try and find a way to do things. But you know what's going to end up happening is people are going to start outsourcing their work. And where does this leave this country again?
So outsourcing as in using people in the Philippines and India and so on.
In India and Philippines and China, anywhere you can get because the thing is, you're encouraging people to be lazy. This whole new inclusive thing that is coming, you're forgetting the country that you're fighting for and you're serving. You're forgetting the British people. You're fighting to be inclusive. Look at what you're doing. What is this?
When you say inclusive, you mean, Mandira, do you mean the DEI agenda? Because we're going to come to that in 15 minutes' time, funny enough.
Yes. Listen, there's a lot about this government. It shocks me because I'm not going to say it. Okay, I'm going to be politically correct, and I'm just going to say
you don't have to be on this show. You don't have to be politically correct.
I'm just saying the last government looks like rock stars compared to this one. Let me just put it that way.
Wow, and that bar was pretty low, wasn't it?
Exactly. The point is, my whole thing is stop calling out the black hole because you fought for it.
Yeah, well, the black hole is also,
Mandira,
Mandira,
to the country. You lied to everyone, and all you're doing is creating more of a backward economy. You're taking this country to a third world country.
Let's be very clear about that black hole. It's a black hole that the Office of Budget Responsibility cannot find. It doesn't exist. A black hole that, if anything, Rachel Reeves added to the tune of about £40 billion in the last budget, particularly because of net zero and the £20 billion a year quest for net zero. That's the cost to the taxpayer, as well as, don't even get me started on asylum and immigration. We've done that a lot over the last 2 hours. Let me ask you this, though. Here's a question. There's been a lot in the news over the last 24 hours because of the spring statement. A lot of left-leaning MPs and indeed some kind of entrepreneurs that are calling for a 2% wealth tax in Britain for everybody that owns assets and cash over £10 million should be immediately taxed 2%. Now, I think that's an absolutely preposterous notion.
I want to know what their secret is and what their loophole is that they have. They might as well share it if they're calling for it.
But
because there is a loophole they've got.
What's your answer as an entrepreneur? So let's assume that you've got 10 million quid's worth of cash and assets sitting there in Britain. And all of a sudden, Rachel Reeves says next time, so in the autumn budget, where she has not ruled out tax rises, by the way, Rachel Reeves has not ruled out tax rises in the next budget in November. What would your attitude and your response be if you were all of a sudden going to be taxed, £200,000 a year on the basis of your 10 million quid's worth of assets? What would you do, Mandira?
Back up and get on a flight.
And that's the easy thing, isn't it? That's exactly what...
Listen, I want to tell you something. No one is on this earth to work and provide ourselves a good... Listen, I'm done surviving. I want to live. Everyone wants to live.
Yeah.
So when you start telling me stuff like you have people getting on a flight, coming here, using the NHS for free, but look at Spain, where you have to have your insurance when you come in or you don't get medical help. You're opening the gates to migrants. They can be looked at in 15 minutes. I have to wait 4 hours. And then you keep taxing me? It's a joke. And guess what? There's going to be a line where everyone's done and everyone has an option to a better life.
Yeah.
So either give us 1 year or you're going to have people leaving.
Can I ask you an immigration question? Which is
yes.
not what I intended to, but just because you raised it. You, as an immigrant to Britain, presumably are a contributor to Britain in terms
yes.
of the people you employ, the tax you pay and so on. How do you feel about the immigration regime of the last few years, where effectively anyone and everyone can game the system and come to Britain with their hand out? How does that, as a first-generation immigrant that had to work hard to come here, how does that make you feel?
No, even for me, it is upsetting because I went through a whole process. Every year I have to make sure I'm reporting what I'm doing. I've come in an innovator visa. The point is, I don't think it's fair. Sorry, my daughter's calling. I don't think it's fair that people are getting in so easily. I'm going private with my health because if I go to the NHS, I have to wait 4 hours. But then you have people who are just, it's just nuts that a migrant has to wait 15 minutes and a tax-paying citizen of this country has to wait 4 hours. I don't get it. I don't get why are migrants rolled out the red carpet? Are they coming in legally? I mean, why are we not stopping the boats? Why?
Well, that is the eternal question that we try and answer on this station.
But I want to know, why are we so inclusive? What is going on?
Well, it's not just inclusive.
It's
because look, it's a bit of a different subject to the one that we got you on to talk about. But it's because I think there is a view by some in politics, that they don't want to be seen to be nasty by stopping immigration, because
to be nasty to your citizens.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. That's the consequence. But it's easier for them in terms of cover to allow it to carry on because they see that as the least worst option, rather than having to be a Nigel Farage kind of Rupert Lowe type that actually very boldly, honestly and decisively says enough's enough. But there is a view from an economics point of view, as we're talking about business, that some people, like Philip Hammond, the ex-Conservative Chancellor of Britain, who thinks that opening the doors and letting anyone and everyone in, whether they have qualifications, money or an intention to work or not, is good for Britain and good for the economy. You would disagree with that?
I would love to have a chat with them and know how.
I'd love that
to.
too. I'd love to see you two in a room together.
Please, it's really nice to throw these statements out, but look around. We are so inclusive today that this country is going, I don't even know, downhill.
Do you think?
Do you
think
you look at you could have people who are coming in on skilled visa paying taxes, but you stop those. And you let migrants roll in who don't want to work, who are living off taxpayers.
I know.
You've got pensioners off. You've got pensioners off their heat. You're giving money to Ukraine, and we're paying for it. Has anyone asked us if we're okay paying for this stuff?
No. No. In successive elections, actually, we've most of us, 70% of us or so, have voted against this stuff. And very, very quickly, because I've got to move on to the next segment. It's a very, very busy show. So, I mean, tell me, do you think Britain is broken? And if it is, do you think it's irreparable?
Listen, this may be controversial again, but I'm going to say if this government carries on, it's beyond broken. So I think we need to make a change and make a change now. Else, we're broken. We're already broken. We're destroyed. Let me put it that way.
Wow, strong words, Mahindra. Look, thank you very, very much indeed. You've been very candid, not controversial, just very honest and truthful. That's what this is all about. This is the home of free speech and common sense, after all. Back after this, I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
One of the things that hasn't been factored into the OBR's numbers and forecast is the employment legislation and the effects of that. And we know that that's going to be a multi-billion-pound burden to businesses. So we're in a very bleak place. Look, she trashed and burnt all of her headroom against the fiscal numbers. She blew the whole lot and more.
and she's now rebuilt this through various decisions that she's taken. We might not in the autumn, I'm afraid, at the next budget be looking at some more hard choices, maybe around tax increases.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. If you are tuning in expecting to hear Ian Collins, it's me, Russell Quirk, in for Ian today and tomorrow until 4 o'clock. Let's go straight to the phones, actually, because lots and lots of calls, and I don't think we've taken enough, actually. I love a call. Let's speak to Anne in Sussex. Anne, you want to talk about the public sector?
Yes, I do. Thank you for taking my call. It was just that the reality is of the changes across the board in the public sector, local authorities, unitary authorities, councils and government. They all seem to be run by the people who are employed in them behind the scenes. When I first entered a council many years ago, we didn't have the cabinet system, and all councillors were involved in what went on in decision making. And many said, we're here because we want to give something to the community, which is now it is a job for life for some people. But what I discovered was once they brought in the cabinet system at the local levels, they were run by a small group of people. And gradually over the years, the councillors who come in don't really know what a councillor's job involves. They are told, like the ministers in government, this is what you can do, this is what you have to agree to. And in fact, it's very difficult to communicate sometimes with staff in local authorities. They're quite remote, and you can't go and talk to them in their offices in the way that we all used to be able to. So what has happened with the unions is that all these organisations across the country are run by the people who are employed in the main. And what I discovered was that the decisions come from what they think is right. Hence the potholes. Everything that once was done is not done because councillors haven't got a big voice to say, that's got to be done quickly. But we've got a load of people in every area of life, health, education, local government, that sit on committees. Some people like committees, but mostly they just agree with what's in front of them.
Well, and my experience is I was a councillor for 8 years in Brentwood and Essex. My experience, I think, is now reflected on a national level in what we have in the kind of the higher reaches of the civil service in Whitehall, and certainly the likes of Douglas Carswell, I think, and Dominic Cummings and David Frost have talked about this recently, in that we talked about the civil service actually on this show already in terms of how bloated it is. 520,000 civil service employees at a cost of £19 billion per annum. What happens in reality, I think, is that councillors or MPs get elected. They're obviously a bit wet behind the ears. They get kind of pulled in and indoctrinated by what I would call, I suppose, the civil service stroke officer executive, who have got quite used to, in kind of yes minister, yes prime minister style, running the show. And a lot of politicians, I mean, despite the fact that I know we don't have a lot of faith in politicians these days, Anne, but a lot of them are actually quite weak, and they're not very good at standing up to council officers or civil service mandarins in Whitehall. So what then happens is the members that are elected with a mandate to represent us and make things better actually are really just a rubber stamp for what the civil service wants to do. And the greatest example of this, of course, is in the Home Office, where we had Suella Braverman and Priti Patel as Home Secretaries that effectively were hamstrung by their own civil servants, their own mandarins, telling them, we don't want to do that, Minister. I mean, is that your experience too?
Yes, and of course, as we found with the situations you just quoted, that if they did say something, that they could have been accused of being nasty or unkind.
Bullying, like Dominic Raab.
The other side as well is, and maybe at local level you might have found, that they ask people to stand. They haven't got enough candidates. They will often ask people who are then elected who didn't want to be, maybe don't even live in the area, and they're very half-hearted, which adds to the power base of the staff who are paid to do the job.
Yeah.
Because they think, well, if we talk to the leaders of the groups.
Yeah, I'm not sure any of that matter or that makes any difference. And we've got to go because we've got to go to the news. Thank you very much for your call. Very, very informative. Great to hear things from the sharp end in terms of your experience. Your experience certainly reflects mine, which is that politicians are really the kind of they should be wagging the tail, but it's often the other way round, that civil servants are the ones in charge. I'll be back after the news with a revelation, a talk exclusive. Back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk. It's just gone 3 o'clock. I'm here for another hour, handing over to Harry Cole at 4 o'clock. OK, it's that time. Here is a Talk exclusive. A few weeks ago, we submitted to Essex Police a Freedom of Information request. Going back a few weeks, there was a lot of talk about police resources and costs and the general ineptitude, I have to say, of many police forces' management, particularly when it comes to such things as the rate of crime. So I can tell you in Essex there are certain crimes like, for instance, assault against the person, sexual offences, drug offences, car crime and so on, that have increased significantly year after year after year. And at the same time, the detection rate, the amount of people that are actually taken to task for said crimes, has also dropped in percentage terms. So In other words, more crime, less crime being solved. But of course, the amount you pay to the police force by way of what they call the council tax precept increases and increases and increases. Certainly in Essex, it seems that the hierarchy of Essex Police, which is run by the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner Roger Hurst, and also the Chief Constable, of course, who is at his behest, they have chosen to increase the cost of the police service by way of that precept almost by the maximum pretty much every year. So about 5-ish% increase in the money that you pay to the police. And if it were not bad enough that that police service takes more money from you, and as a consequence, as a result, in turn, crime increases and the rate of detection, the people that are caught, reduces, as if that were not bad enough. When you dig into the budget of said police forces, particularly Essex in this case, and the reason I've chosen Essex is because of where I live. Essex is my county. And you look at the amount of money that they are spending, I'm sure you will agree, wholly unnecessarily, is extraordinary. So the FOI request that we submitted a few weeks ago, the Essex Police responded with yesterday, about 3 weeks late, by the way, so they missed all of the deadlines. They were outside of the rules, outside of the guidance. The question we posed in the FOI was, how many police officers, how many roles, and at what cost are you focused on DEI? So how many members of your staff are focused on diversity, equity and inclusion, so-called, and what does it cost? So in other words, how much is it costing the Essex taxpayer to be right on, to be kind of woke, to tick boxes and to ensure in some way that Essex Police think that they have adequately ticked enough boxes by way of gender, ethnicity and so on. So nothing to do with merit here, by the way. This is all about ticking boxes to ensure that Essex Police look cool and woke and good when it comes to their demographic of the police force. So I'm joined by Peter Blexley now, who is just the man to get really irritated by this. Peter, I don't think, knows the numbers yet. He knows that we've done the FOI. Peter, welcome.
Good afternoon.
I don't know what mood you're in, mate, today, but this is going to blow your socks off. You're going to be really irritated by this, I'm afraid. Your old mob, I mean, I know you weren't in Essex, but your old force have gone from spending money on crime and police officers to spending money on diversity and inclusion managers.
Yes. Well, and let's just imagine when you deliver these, what I'm sure will be absolutely sickening figures of the huge amount of money that is being quite frankly wasted, multiply that by 43, because we've got 43 police services in England and Wales, and they will all be dipping into their pockets full of taxpayer funded cash to waste money on such initiatives. I'm bracing myself.
OK, well, I'm glad you're sitting down, Peter Blexley. Right, here we go. So Essex Police have a total of 10 people focused specifically on diversity and inclusion. And they include, I'm going to go through some of the titles, obviously not the names, we're not interested in who the individuals are, but just the titles that Essex Police have created out of the ether to make sure that they're right on and woke. There is, Peter, a diversity and inclusion manager, of course there is. There's an Essex Police lead chaplain. There is a diversity and inclusion coordinator. There is a diversity and inclusion officer. There are 2 positive action officers. What on earth is that? Come back to that in a second. There is a diversity and inclusion team sergeant. There is an HR positive action constable. In fact, there's 2 of those. A superintendent of HR projects and a chief inspector of positive action, as well as, of course, a diversity and inclusion inspector. So that's 10 meaningless, pointless roles that the Essex taxpayer is paying for, embedded within Essex Police Service, to tick a few DEI boxes wholly unnecessarily. Let me just quickly move on to the cost of this, Peter. One of them is a superintendent earning up to £95,000. One of them is a chief inspector earning up to £70,000. £100,000 of your money. And there's an inspector on 66k, there's a sergeant on up to 53k, the constables involved are up to £48,000. So the total, drum roll, drum roll, drum roll, we are, or rather my county, taxpayers, the households that pay council tax in Essex, are bankrolling this nonsense to the tune of £614,000 every year. What do you think of that, Blexley?
I wonder, when these people join the police service, what they actually thought they were signing up to do. What did they think that the job would entail? Did they think by any chance that it might include solving crime, keeping the streets safe and arresting bad people? Because I would imagine that very few of that aforementioned list of ridiculously highly paid people have ever arrested anybody in recent history. In fact, I urge Talk, the home of common sense, please do a follow-up Freedom of Information Act request to ask how many of the aforementioned actually have arrested anybody in the last 12 months. And if so, what for? It's a scandal. It's not policing. It's wokery, it's fluffiness, it's liberalness, utter tosh.
Yeah, and Peter, there's no mandatory. There's no mandatory dictate here from government, is there? You know, there's nothing to say that police forces have to have all of these people in place in these roles earning this money. This is choice, right? This is the choice of the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner. The PCC, by the way, or in this case PFCC, Police Fire and Crime Commissioner, signs off the budget. So that individual, Roger Hurst, who I should declare an interest, I did work with him. I was a councillor with him many years ago. He signed this off. So he's happy as a Conservative Police and Fire and Crime Commissioner to be spending £614,000 of Essex taxpayers' money on DEI nonsense. Let me translate that, by the way, in terms of what that means in terms of households. It means that about 2,300 Essex council tax-paying households are paying their £260 annual precept just to pay for DEI. 2,300 Essex households just to pay Roger Hurst's nonsense DI agenda.
And the police and fire and crime constable is elected to hold the police to account, not to sponsor and encourage and bankroll this kind of nonsense. What do people want from their police service? They want them to patrol the streets, they want them to investigate crime, and they want them to lock up bad people. The very essence of policing, which in my experience of talking to many people and meeting people every day of the week and talking about policing, is what the public want. These are the kind of people that want to paint rainbows on police cars, wasting even more money. These are the kind of people that want to dance around the maypole and do the Macarena at various pride gatherings, none of which has got to do with nicking burglars and car thieves and vandals and people who want to beat people up and commit serious sexual offences against women and girls. All the kinds of stuff that we like seeing people locked up for. Now, I heard the Essex Police actually had the temerity in their response to say, oh, well, we've increased crime detection by 12%. Well, let me tell you, they were starting from a very low figure.
Well, Pete, let me just tell you, this is very disingenuous. So let me read this, in the interest of balance, let me read the response that we have got exclusively from Essex Police today, which says, defending the cost, Essex Police said crime had fallen by 10,500 offences in the past year, with significant drops in burglary, domestic abuse, vehicle theft and rape. We police, apparently, without fear or favour, a spokesperson said, understanding our diverse county is key to maintaining trust and driving down crime. The DE and I team cost makes us around 0.2% of the force's overall budget. Okay, well, I don't care what it is as a percentage. The fact that you've got a huge budget and actually you still have, in many respects, rising crime and a lower detection rate says it all. Whether it's 0.2% or 10%, it's still £614,000 of Essex taxpayers' money. The notion that being more DEI-friendly cuts crime is absolutely nonsense and completely and utterly unprovable. And let me tell you, the first words, the first sentence of this statement, Peter, I can tell you, having looked into, because it's my county where I live, we can all pick and choose figures that make your argument look more more strong in terms of its impact. And what Essex Police have done here is, of course, to take some of the offences and to label them, to kind of total them up in terms of then portraying a very, very convenient set of stats that makes it look as though Essex Police are doing job. I can tell you, when it comes to such things as violence against the person, which I think is quite a significant crime for us to be concerned about, one of the biggest crimes, one of the most serious crimes, and sexual offences generally, not only in the last few years have those crimes gone up significantly, but the detection rate now in Essex for rape, do you know what it is? It's 3%. So in other words, 97% of rapes that are reported do not end up with a conviction in Essex. And that is why I have such a problem with this, Pete. £614,000 spent on nonsense that makes no difference to anybody apart from some woke lunatics that want to tick some boxes, whilst this, actually, £614,000 would fund 20 extra police officers. So I'm not surprised by the response we've had from Essex Police here in terms of its obfuscation and its disingenuous nature. The fact still remains, Essex Police is a mess. Ask Alison Pearson, by the way, your friend and mine, a journalist that gets doorstepped by Essex Police because she happened to say something that someone didn't like, and resources thrown at that in terms of her being stopped from having an opinion as a journalist. We're spending time and money on DEI and doorstepping journalists and not solving crime in Essex. It's an absolute and utter disgrace, Peter Blexley.
And let's remember how Essex Police shamefully tried to defend their actions against Alison Pearson, and they dug their heels in, and they pushed and they pushed and they pushed until somebody, clearly very senior, I would imagine, in government, pointed out to them the folly of their ways, and they had to embarrassingly climb down from their completely non-justifiable position. And think of all those victims, your neighbours, many other victims in Essex today, who've woken up to find that their car or their van is not on the driveway where they parked it last night, who will come home from work today to find their house burgled, who may have the huge misfortune to be assaulted this evening as they walk home from a peaceful, enjoyable evening in the pub. And those people will not get any justice while Essex Police fritters a vast amount of money which could so easily be put into better policing, more targeted policing to help catch people, reduce crime and make the streets a bit safer. Shame on everybody whose grubby fingerprints are all over this nonsense.
Indeed, and Pete, you know, the next time someone in Essex, or as you say, any other police force that has this same attitude, and I suspect you're right, it is all of them, next time you do have calls to call the police and they tell you that they can't come out and attend your burglary or the assault in your local high street or car damage, car theft or whatever, next time they tell you that they don't have the resources, please feel free, all of you, to use the fact that if you've got £614,000 of taxpayers' money to spend on DEI, then there really is no excuse for you not to have enough resource and police officers to actually respond, which is their core absolute function. Many people will be watching and listening to this, Peter, saying, well, actually, you're right, I never see a police officer. I mean, there are more police officers in Essex now, you know, than ever because of the fact that the precept, the council tax cost has gone up and up and up every year over the last however many years. How often do we really see police officers like you would have done in the old days, you know, pacing the beat or just driving round as a preventative thing? I can tell you where I live in Shenfield and Brentwood in Essex, I only ever see the police if they're rushing to something that has already happened. There's no deterrent. There's no wandering around just, you know, to be seen. Where I live in Hutton, we have now had to employ our own separate private security company because the police where I live are completely and utterly non-existent. So I'm not only paying my council tax precept to the police, I'm having to double pay by way of private security. And that's just not good enough. That's just not on.
And the private security patrol your streets, respond very quickly, and are highly, highly effective.
Well, they're ex-old coppers like you, Pete, so they're very gritty and down to earth, I can tell you.
Yeah, and everything that the police in the modern day should be, but are not. And why is policing so appalling? Because it is in the grip of academia. The academics have got hold of it. There are now no less than 47 universities in the UK that offer degrees in policing, much of it taught by people who the most risk they've ever faced in their lives is getting a paper cut. That is why policing in so many regards is going down the pan because it's been taught by people who know nothing of policing. And consequently, when these officers are at universities, they get indoctrinated with Marxist claptrap and other nonsense and come out into the police and have the ambitions to rise to the rank of superintendent, £90,000 a year, talking about diversity, equality and inclusion.
Well, and Pete, we're seeing it play out, aren't we? So we're seeing that academia and that kind of that corrupted academic institutionalisation alive and well and demonstrated here in the fact that it has filtered down to the reality of spending £614,000 on box-ticking DEI people. Someone's just texted, actually, Pete, this is a very, very good point, not quite on policing, but when it comes to taxation. Don in Chelmsford says, obviously as an Essex resident, while we're talking about Essex and council tax, he says, what about the potholes? He said, you know, we're paying all this money in council tax, either to Brentwood or Basildon or Southend or whatever, and to Essex, who are actually responsible for roads. The roads have never been in such a state. So policing, roads, social care, I'm not really sure that our overseers, when it comes to the police, maybe even the fire service, and certainly local and county councils, they're clearly not fit for purpose.
No, because so much of the public service has been gripped once again by academia. There is a lack of practical thinking because so many of the managers, the superintendents, are not practical people. They're not off the front line. They've not spent any huge amount of time on the front line, understanding the every common person's issues, whether that be potholes or policing. And therein lies the nub of the matter. People that think all the answers to everything can be found in books when manifestly they can't are in the positions of power and influence.
Yeah, we need to get rid of the academics and put some old school coppers in place. I know you and I have had that conversation 25 times, Peter, but that's what needs to happen. We need to restore policing to be, you know, commonsensical, down to earth, grounded, and above all for the people, without fear or favour, and actually to be seen and to respond. Unfortunately, Pete, I'm sure this won't be the last time that we have to rehearse our criticisms of not the rank and file, but those in charge of our hapless senior police regimes. Peter Blexley, as ever, thank you very much indeed. Let me know what you think about all this, particularly if you're an Essex resident. If you're one of the 2,300 people, households in Britain, in Essex, that is having to pay everything that you pay to Essex Police just for a bunch of DEI employees, let me know what you think about that. 0344 499 1000. Is it okay? Maybe you're happy that a big percentage of your council tax is going towards woke box tickers. I'm not. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
The Gazans, after 17 months of suffering, and of course years and years of brainwashing and intimidation by their jihadi overlords Hamas, who are basically no different from Islamic State. They stem from the same ideological source in the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. They're finally finding their voices. Gaza is a brainwashed population. There's a lot of radicalism there, but there have always been people who've objected to Hamas. One or two of them I know personally. I've been in touch with them. They put me onto this initially, sending me videos of these protests because it wasn't being covered in the BBC.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. So lots and lots of calls and texts. I've been a bit negligent with the text, actually, I'm afraid, so apologies for that. I'm going to read a few out now, actually, because you have been very, very busy getting in touch with us here at Talk. So let me just go through some of them with you. And they cover quite a few of the subjects, of course, that we've been talking about since 1 o'clock. Arlie says, on the topic of immigration, I'm an international student and I've graduated and gone through the graduate visa route in the hopes to get some first world experience in my field. My background is engineering and I studied a Masters of Science Sustainability and have previous experience working in my field of 5 years. But I haven't been able to find a formal job in my field, and now with the new rules, as in earnings I presume hourly means, I'd need a minimum salary of £38,700 a year in order to qualify for a skilled worker visa and be able to stay here. The reality is that it is not easy for immigrants, at least the ones like me who do things through the right way, to find a formal job which is willing to pay that very high salary, even with my master's degree, when I'm not yet senior in my career. I'm 30 and I'm now planning to leave the UK this summer, since there's no point staying or trying to stay here with how the economic situation is going on at the moment. To be honest, for international students, they go on to say, we paid for our student visa £2,000 in fees plus all the tuition fees, and then a further £2,000 for graduate visas after finishing our studies in the hope of getting some work experience in a first world work environment. So at least speaking from a student's point of view, we pay and we contribute to the economy. We pay fees for the NHS as part of our visa fees, and then we pay national insurance tax when we work. So from our end, we end up paying double, which is okay, actually, because it's understandable, because we're international. Wow, okay, what a commonsensical approach. But please understand that there are immigrants out here who pay taxes and visa fees that are very high, and we're doing everything in the right legal way, and now it's impossible to stay here, even with our high standard of education. By the way, I'm Mexican, I'm a graduate student from the University of Aberdeen, I'm 30 years old, but I'm planning to leave this summer. Well, look, what an absolute outrageous and ridiculous unintended consequence of the rules. You've got Arley here who's done all the right things, jumped through all the right hoops, paid the money, done the right thing in terms of becoming a formally recognised and accepted immigrant to this country by way of contributing with intellect, having a background in study, and clearly someone that's going to contribute to this country in terms of their work ethic, and indeed their taxation. But because of these rules, the increase in the amount of money that you have to earn in order to stay, £38,700, because they're not yet at that level of seniority in their profession, they've got to leave. Now, this is the opposite of what we should be doing, isn't it? Now, look, I say this as unashamedly pro-immigration. You might not believe that, but I really, really am, on the basis that people should be able to come here to this country if they're going to contribute. So not boat people, not criminals, not those that would do us harm, and certainly not those that want to sit on benefits in a free council house with free education for their kids and free NHS treatment. Not those people. Those people are net detractors from our economy, and actually some would argue our culture. But people like Arley here, this very brave and poignant text that they just sent into the producers here, what an absolute travesty. What a terrible, terrible shame. What an awful unintended consequence. Let me know what you think about this. Wow, 0344 499 1000. Look, immigration is good. Definitely not all of it, definitely not where we are now. But what a sad state of affairs that was. OK, I think we had a caller. Have I still got a caller? Oh, the caller's dropped off, never mind. Well, I'll just keep ranting then and read some more text perhaps, unless the caller wants to come back. Look, there have been lots, by the way, but we had one lined up there and they've just dropped off for some reason, probably because I was ranting so much about how disgraceful it is that an immigrant to this country that wants to contribute has been discouraged from doing so, and at the same time we're letting 40,000 people on boats that are anonymous come into this country that don't contribute. It's madness. It's stupid, isn't it? 0344 499 1000. Somebody else here says, Caroline says, it's so refreshing to have a person of a different ethnic background criticising illegal immigration. I think she's talking about Mandira from earlier on. They are called, otherwise, if it's a white person doing it, basically they're called fascist and far right. Mandira spoke a lot of sense, says Caroline. Let's go to Andrew in Hertfordshire, who's back. Andrew, thanks very much indeed for calling talk. What did you want to say, mate?
Yeah, it's about the sentencing. If you look at that Just Stop Oil, they changed the law and they brought them within a corral whereby the offences were being sentenced to prison.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they've decided, Tamala and Tabitha and Tarquin have decided that they don't want to look at the back of a door for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So you've got the migrants. If you've got them coming in and they know that the actual law is weak, they're not going to stop. They're going to come in floods.
They're going to be more encouraged, Andrew. Well, I mean, you've got two things happening here. You've already got the incentive, which is, and I always point this out, it's still there, by the way. Look at the Home Office website, and I think it's entitled Asylum, What You Get, right? So if you Google that right now, the words asylum, what you get, you will find an official page on the government's Home Office website that tells you, as an asylum seeker from Afghanistan, Syria, wherever you might want to pretend you come from, tells you exactly what you get by way of cash in benefits, free house, free education, free NHS, free dentistry, free. So that's the incentive, which of course is part of the problem, Andrew, that we provide this incentive, which is literally us standing there with our arms open saying, hey, coming in the water's lovely. But at least there was some kind of deterrent by way of legislation saying, look, if you come into the country without permission, you're therefore automatically illegal. And if you come with fraudulent documents, which obviously some do, there's a prison sentence up to 10 years. And now what we're seeing is not only is the incentive still there, because that website has not been taken down, but we also now have the kind of the further welcome, Matt, which is, look, you're not even really going to be hauled over the coals from a prosecution or a criminality perspective. What exactly do you think is really going on here, Andrew? Why are our successive hapless governments so keen to have anybody, and I mean anybody and everybody, come to these shores?
Because there isn't a coherent, joined-up policy. No one person sits atop it, and the civil servants have come into it, and the left wing and the Guardian types and the Channel 4, and they're having a field day. They're just taking us for mugs.
They really are.
And unfortunately, out there, some poor family, some young child is going to be the victim of a horrific crime. And we know that's going to happen, and then the Labour Party are in a really bad place.
Well, I think that's kind of happened. I'm not sure that Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, I think they're completely insulated from it. I think they're in their kind of elite Islington bubbles. I'm not sure that they're completely in touch at all with the real world when it comes to such things, even though, thanks to some of us on the right, we've pressured for things in terms of data by way of the relationship, the link between some immigration, some countries, by way of those people that come here, and indeed crime. It's now been proven that there are some nationalities, shock horror, that are more likely to commit crime, particularly of a serious nature, sexual violence and so on. There are some nationalities that are more inclined, have more of a propensity to commit those crimes than British people, let's say, British people that were born here, naturalised people, whatever native term you want to use. But the government won't do anything about it because I think there's another agenda at play, Andrew. Look, we could talk about this all day. Andrew from Hertfordshire, thank you very much indeed. Look, we're going to take another break. We've only got half an hour left of this. It's gone very quickly, isn't it? I'll try and read out some more text, maybe some more calls before we get to 4 o'clock. But I think next we're going to be talking about trans issues and maybe an ounce of common sense from the universities at last. Russell Quirk, this is Talk. I'll be back in a sec.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Another half an hour of this, or 25 minutes of this. Let's get on some trans issues, shall we? And actually a bit of a kind of change of gear with regard to, it seems the Office for Students saying to universities that, of course, we've talked about woke police forces. Universities and their alumni are absolutely indoctrinated by way of the woke mind virus, for sure, so much so that they don't like opinions, of course, that don't accord with their own, particularly when it comes to such things as transgender issues. But it seems that the Office for Students has now said to universities that if they don't allow free speech, even on such a subject as sensitive as transgender issues, they might be fined up to, I mean, millions and millions of pounds. Well, this sounds very interesting. Let's talk to somebody that knows all about these issues, Connie Shaw, who's a political commentator. Connie, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Russell.
Hello. You've had your own issues, of course, which I know is not the purpose of you coming on to talk about your thing very specifically, but just tell us about that very quickly for context. You were a radio host at the University of Leeds, I think, weren't you? And what happened?
I was on the committee at Leeds Student Radio, and I was removed from my position for what I believe to be, and so does the Free Speech Union, down to my gender critical views. And
what were they, Connie? What were your so-called gender critical? Did you say, I mean, you didn't say men are men and women are women, did you? Because that would be outrageous.
I did say something along those lines. Gender critical views are the idea that sex is real and immutable and that you can't change sex, and that's basically it.
Right, OK. So do you welcome this news, this story that we're talking about here, which is the Office for Students, that seems now to have the power to fine universities if they curtail free speech, and certainly in this instance, as it applies and relates to people talking about a view they might have, like you and like me, by the way, and like many, many right-minded, commonsensical people. So in other words, you should be allowed to talk about the fact that you believe that there are two genders, men are men, women are women, men can't be women, women can't be men. That now no longer can be curtailed by way of universities, and if those attempts at free speech are curtailed, those universities could be fined hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds. This is great news, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really fantastic news, and Kathleen Stock has essentially been vindicated as a result of this ruling. So the Office for Students has fined Sussex University £585,000, but Arif Ahmed basically said that it could have been up to 3.7 million. So they actually got a huge discount up to what it could be. Like you said, it could have been millions. But what's so ridiculous about this whole thing is it seems like Sussex University and the Vice-Chancellor, Sasha Rose Neal, has not learnt her lesson, because on Times Radio this morning, she was claiming that by removing these policies, such as the trans policy, which the Office for Students found to be stifling the free speech of staff and students on campus, she said that by removing those policies and by not allowing universities to make those policies, that unis aren't able to protect minorities, which is a completely ridiculous statement, because no other minority has any policy written in place that specifically says that they must be presented in a positive light, which was what was said in the trans policy at the University of Sussex, which is why, for professors like Kathleen Stock, having open and honest debates about this topic is really difficult. She even said that this ruling essentially means that the only thing that universities are able to regulate is illegal speech. Essentially, she said that universities should be able to regulate legal speech, which is a very concerning thing for a Vice-Chancellor of a university to say.
And it's pretty typical of universities that, of course, have banned all sorts of people from daring to want to take the stage and have an opinion in front of students. The concern here, of course, is that it's very subjective, isn't it? Very arbitrary. I mean, I was reading some of the policies of this university earlier on, where they talk, for instance, about, let me give you an example, that when it comes to transphobic issues, that transphobic propaganda will not be tolerated. That is part of their policy document. Their trans and non-binary equality policy says that the course material that is taught to students must positively represent trans people and trans lives. Well, look, that is indoctrination. That is an assumption that you must believe that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, or indeed that there might be 537 different genders and so on. So when it comes to those students having the ability to make up their own mind, critical thinking and so on, the university is effective. This is Orwellian, isn't it? A policy that says you must agree with us, even though the policy, the meaning of, let's say, transphobic propaganda, whatever that is, by way of interpretation. These interpretations are set by maybe, 3 or 4 members of a governance board somewhere, but then, of course, filter down to the entire faculty and students of that university. I mean, this is indoctrination, otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase transphobic propaganda is particularly concerning because the transphobia as a term is so broad that just saying that you think that women are adult human females can be seen as transphobic, even though that view is specifically protected in the Equality Act. Yeah. When Maya Forstater won her case, when they refer to gender critical views, they specifically include under that the idea that trans women are men. But lots of people would see that as being transphobic propaganda.
Yeah. The other note within this this news piece today is that the University of Sussex, surprise, surprise, plan to legally challenge the Office for Students' findings. And this is a power, by the way, that was only given to the Office for Students in January. I think the fine was levied last week, that £585,000 that you talk about. You would imagine, though, that University of Sussex should be a bit careful, because one would imagine if they appeal, they're appealing on the basis of not having to pay a fine. But one would imagine that it could go the other way, that the appeal could result in them being fined that £3.7 million instead, that was the upper end of what they could have been fined. But I guess if it's not your money, you don't have to worry about it too much.
I think it would be colossally stupid for the University of Sussex to try and appeal this, because
but they are. They are.
I know, and it's just outrageous because cases that involve gender critical views, over 80% of them are now won by people who have had their speech suppressed. So if they are even looking at the pattern of the way that the courts are ruling on this, they would not be making this move. I mean, I have no idea what the thinking is behind it. They just need to suck it up and accept that they have suppressed people's free speech at their university.
Well, it's coercion. I mean, you know, and regulating not just free speech, but this is worse than that. This is not just saying you can't say this, that, or the other. This is saying you must believe our doctrine. That's actually what the university, in this instance, University of Sussex, policy on so-called transphobia is, that you must believe that men can be women, women can be men, and so on. Or that, you know, gender is not necessarily assigned at birth, and that absolute nonsense. So this is worse than suppressing free speech, I would say, Connie. This is indoctrination. This is coercion.
Well, they would dispute that. They would say that the policy is there just to protect trans students from harassment. But like I was saying earlier, the definition of transphobia is so broad that at the end of the day, it does prevent people from speaking their mind. And the Office for Students found that Kathleen Stock changed the way that she taught her course as a result of this policy. And she'd raised the alarm multiple times, yet nothing was done. So to say that it is just to protect trans students is simply not the case. It is suppressing free speech.
And do you think, Connie, this is happening literally in every university across the land? I mean, even the big ones, even the Oxfords and Cambridges of this world?
I'm not sure about Oxford and Cambridge, but I do know that lots of universities, including my own, the University of Leeds, has almost an identical policy in their documentation, which Kathleen actually cites in her article for Unheard. And so I think universities will need to be thinking very seriously now as a result of this ruling. If they don't want to be caught out too, they need to be revising their policies.
Yeah. And in a similar vein, I don't know if you've seen this story today, that the ONS, so the Office of National Statistics, who one would imagine we should be able to rely on for, let me think, statistics, have had to admit that when it comes to matters of a trans nature, that their previous discovery, their findings, their belief that from the 2021 census there were 262,000 trans individuals in Britain, that they actually now say in this press release, I'm laughing because this is so ridiculous, that those statistics should now no longer be used because they're inaccurate and incorrect.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy about this report is that it's been found that people whose first language isn't English, they were 4 times more likely to indicate that they were trans when they filled out the 2021 census.
What do you think they thought they were saying? I mean, obviously they, in all innocence, thought that they were answering a different question.
I mean, the question that was put to people was, is the gender you identify with the same as your sex registered at birth. That would be confusing for anyone who's not aware of the gender identity theory or transgenderism, let alone for someone whose first language is
Connie, why don't these people just ask a simple question? Were you born a man or were you born a woman? That would be it, wouldn't it?
Well, I do think to an extent it is important to have these ideas tracked, because I think Helen Joyce says how this idea of being trans or the concept of gender identity should really be put into a category of belief system. So we record whether people are Christian or Muslim or whatever other religion, we still record those beliefs. I think it is important to record whether the public are still sort of going along with this idea that gender identity is a thing. But it's similar in the sense that even when we record whether someone's a Christian or not, if someone says that they're a Christian, that doesn't really tell us anything about them as a person, in the sense that does being a Christian mean that you go to church all the time? Does it mean you actually believe in God? Or are you just from a family who says that they're Christian? Do you just think that that label fits you as a person? There might be nothing about that person's life to an outside perspective that would make you think that they're a Christian, but they've put that on their form. Gender identity, I think, to some extent is the same thing, but I do think it is still important that we track these things. But like you say, well, like I was saying, it's such a confusing question.
No, I agree that things should be tracked. So look, we would want to know for all sorts of reasons how many people are identifying as something one way or the other. I get that. I don't see any harm in collecting that. But the problem with this particular kind of news today from the ONS is that they've called into question their own data, of course, and said that no one should rely on the 262,000 trans individuals that were recorded in the census as being trans. But they don't actually tell us what the consequence or the conclusion of that is in terms of how many therefore actually do. So, I mean, we've got bogus information, but they don't actually give us a conclusion. They don't say, right, as a consequence, 0.3% of the UK population identifies as trans. That's the thing that you are suggesting we get to, but we don't have that now.
Well, I think in some ways it's going to be almost impossible to find that data in an accurate way, because it's like, the idea is that gender is fluid and that these ideas are changing all the time. So what we, 10 years ago might have considered to be transgender, now might just include someone who's gender fluid or gender non-conforming. These ideas are so wishy-washy that in some ways you're right, what is this actually telling us? But what is particularly concerning is that when the Office for Statistics Regulation questioned the ONS on the data that they found, the ONS was very defensive, which is very concerning, because that suggests that there is sort of an ideological drive behind a public body whose sole purpose is to collect accurate data. Yeah. So why they're getting defensive about this is very questionable.
Maybe we should do an FOI here at Talk on how much it costs to run the Office of National Statistics. Doesn't sound like it's very fit for purpose, does it? I've just calculated as well, on the old numbers, the numbers that now are incorrect, we must not use, 0.38% of the UK population identifies as trans. But of course, it's less than that, isn't it? We don't know how much less, because we can't use the 262,000 number. It's obviously much, much less than that. So we do spend a lot of time and effort in this country on identity politics, considering it only affects 0.38% of the population, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And hopefully reviews like the Sullivan review that came out last week will urge bodies to rethink the way that they're collecting data, because ultimately the most important thing we know is what someone's sex is. Whether they feel like they have a gender identity that's different to that, like I said, is almost a separate category. It's a belief system. Well,
and again, we can get into what sex is versus gender, but I always take it back to the old chromosome argument. No matter what wig and lipstick you put on as a man to become a woman, your chromosomes stay the same. Connie Shaw, thank you very much indeed. Very informative. I'm going to take a break. Back after this for the final few minutes.
claim is that she had given Rupert Lowe and his legal team until Wednesday to respond, and then the report was published on the Tuesday, so he didn't have time to respond.
Mr. Lowe himself declared on social media last week that he would not be cooperating with the investigation.
Why not wait the extra day?
The second point is that he had a solicitor engaging with the independent KC, and that solicitor also confirmed that Mr. Lowe would not be responding prior to that deadline. So I absolutely deny the parties acted in any way improperly or jumped the gun.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So the last 10 minutes of this extravaganza. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, for listening, for all your calls and texts. I'll be handing over to Harry Cole very, very shortly. He'll be in the studio in a few minutes' time. Meantime, let's go through some texts, because there's been lots and lots of them, and I feel like I've neglected you. Apologies. Deborah from Essex. Good. Says, I live in Brentwood, that's where I live, and our neighbour had his work van and tools stolen off his drive during the night. The street lights are now turned off in Essex at midnight, so it's a free-for-all for all crime. And all the police said was, we won't ever catch them. Here's a crime reference number. And by the way, she says, our council tax has just gone up by 5%. It's shocking. Well, Deborah, look, you can take solace and comfort in the fact that at least Essex Police Service is nice and DEI compliant. So as you're being ignored for your burglary or your car theft or an assault in the street, or your watch getting nicked off you in Lakeside or in Brentwood or wherever, it's fine, because the Essex Police Service have ticked a few boxes to make sure that the demographic of the police service is just nice, just right. Also, another text here from Paul Quirk. The only way we're going to stop this madness of allowing illegal migrants to enter and stay in Britain is to vote out both Labour and the Conservatives, who have failed us for 3 decades. I completely agree with that, Paul. I don't think you will read this out as you want the Tories back in. Do I, Paul? When have I ever said that? I think the Tories are as contemptible, frankly, as this lot. I want a political revolution. I don't know what that needs to look like, but I tell you what it doesn't look like is hapless, samey career politicians that have all acted together, is where I agree with you, to pretty much destroy our once great nation. And I do not think the current crop of Tories are the answer, Paul. I can assure you of that. Give me some Thatcherites, yeah, and I might agree with you, but the likes of this lot, no chance. Michelle Alley says, mass illegal migrants entering the UK with a government that are doing nothing to stop it. This is what happens when you have a human rights solicitor become our Prime Minister. What about the human rights of UK citizens? Yes, don't disagree with any of that. Let's go to the phones quickly for the last few minutes. Let's speak to Rudy. Rudy, you want to talk about asylum seekers, our favourite subject?
Yeah, I've got 3 points to make. First one is, if they chuck all their documents in the sea, why can't we just say to them, look, we're going to have to send you back because we cannot process your claim because you've got no identification or documents for us to establish who you are?
Because what they do as soon as they get here, unfortunately, Rudy, is as our Border Force, ex-Border Force boss was saying earlier on, they immediately play the asylum card because that's what the people traffickers tell them to do.
I get that.
And then the rules, whatever they are, whether we agree with them or not, I don't, say that as soon as you play the asylum card, you get a towel wrapped round, you get a pizza and a hotel room.
But the point is, if they've got no ID, how can you process an asylum claim if you don't know who they are? So by you saying that you don't have their documents, they have to go back in order to get the proper paperwork.
Rudy, I would love that to be the case, but it's clearly not. And whether that's our Human Rights Act or whether it's the United Nations Convention, laws can be changed, and it's pretty easy to change those laws. I mean, all you need is an act of parliament. In fact, sometimes you don't even need that. There are things called statutory instruments, which means effectively a cabinet minister can change rules by way of what's called secondary legislation. So you don't even need an act of parliament necessarily. Where there's a will with these things, there's a way. You had some other points you said you wanted to make, Rudy.
Yeah, right. The two other points is Keir Starmer's got no intention to want to stop asylum seekers. People should remember he was the one that took the government to court in order to give them benefits. That's the second point. And the third point is, like when that lady was saying about, this place is going to the dogs, right? Well, the thing is this, they're all about saying they're going to cut benefits to get people back into work. But if businesses are leaving and making people redundant because they don't want to pay the extra high national insurance, how are they going to get them back to work?
Yeah, but you're being way too commonsensical, Rudy. So yes, you're right. So they are. Some would say, even the Daily Mirror, the front page of the Daily Mirror, the left-leaning Labour-supporting Daily Mirror would say that what Rachel Reeves suggested yesterday in terms of £5 billion worth of benefit cuts for the sick and the disabled, that is an assault on the poor. So that's £5 billion saved. Let's not forget we're spending £20 billion a year on our quest for net zero. We spent £8 billion a year on asylum. That's just accommodation and processing. And of course, then we spend about another £8 billion a year on foreign aid. So there's lots and lots of things that we could cut, isn't there, in terms of not having to bother pensioners in terms of their winter fuel allowance and so on. There's lots and lots of money that could be saved elsewhere. I mean, the foreign aid budget alone is £8 billion. We've just donated.
What about cutting David Lammy's £500,000 on food and drink in 6 months? How about cutting that?
Yeah, no, I know, but that you're assuming that the ideology of this government and the previous one accord with yours and mine, and they clearly don't, because as I say, government is about making choices. Governments successively, I'm afraid, Rudy, have made choices that is, we have an open door immigration policy. It's wrong, it's not what we voted for, but it's what Rishi Sunak and David Cameron and Tony Blair and now Keir Starmer are advocating. Rudy, got to let you go there because I've only got a couple of minutes, and Harry Cole is busting to come and talk to us. And by the way, actually, it's time to find out about how you could be in with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer. Well, I might have a go at this.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
So I've just been told I can't apply for the Oasis tickets because I'm technically an employee, so I'm going to have to pay 500 quid a ticket like everybody else. Harry, welcome.
Hello.
Oasis fan?
Yeah, yes. I don't have tickets yet. So,
well, yeah. I'm hoping they're going to drop in price. We'll see.
Well, we already saw. You saw the Competition Markets Authority the other week saying everyone got ripped off. So.
Well, I think the government, because they've got nothing else to do, apparently going to regulate tickets out. I mean, we need them to do that rather than worrying about immigration and tax and the economy.
They want to regulate anything they can get their hands on.
Yeah, they love it. What are you going to be talking about, mate?
Lots. Rachel Reeves is obviously the fallout from her spring statement continues.
Daily Mirror front page. I mean,
look, it was a complete set of negative front pages. 265 odd days into this Labour government, and it's not looking good. She's had to come back for more already cuts, but will the Labour Party wear more cuts? I don't think the markets won't wear any more borrowing. So.